Oh, g'day, mate. 40 here. So I want to talk about politics as a vehicle for all sorts of political emotions and compulsions. I've just been reading this terrific book, Enlarging America, the cultural work of Jewish literary scholars, 1930 to 1990. And there's a chapter here on Daniel Aaron, The Lure of Literary Stewardship. And it's talking about his famous book, Writers on the Left. And he reflected that some writers on the left joined or broke from the communist movement because of their wives, or for reasons of their career, or because they read their own inner disturbances into the realities of social dislocation. So the subject matter of politics, left-wing politics in this case, was often simply the vehicle for non-political emotions and compulsions. So there's probably no phrase I've said on this show more often that marginalized movements attract marginalized people. So let's say that you're losing at life. You're working a job for $11 an hour and your wife doesn't want to have sex with you, or you can't get a woman. What better coping mechanism than to latch on to some conspiracy theory that says that your problems are primarily the result of a rigged system? Right? It's very painful to say, oh, my problems are my own fault. It's going to be much more psychologically pleasing if you're able to kind of offshore, unload, remove, detach your problems and blame them on a rigged political system, blame them on the Jews, blame them on the elites, right? So let's say you have a choice. On the one hand, you can go to 10 years of painful, perhaps expensive, inside-oriented psychotherapy. That's one option. Another option is you can join a 12-step program, get a sponsor, attend meetings daily, and do painful, demanding 12-step work. Or alternatively, you can embrace conspiracy theories and hang out online and sometimes in real life with people who share your conspiracy theories that almost all your problems are caused by forces outside yourself.
But whatever the truth, the notes have spawned a considerable academic industry.
The notes should be taken with a lot of grains of salt. They are rather illuminating, especially in pointing out Tiresias. But I think Eliot himself once said about the poet is like a burglar who throws the watchdog a large lump of meat, and while the watchdog is eating the meat, he gets away with the burglary. Well, what does that mean? I think it means, in the case of the Wasteland, that Eliot liked to think of all these scholars and teachers and people occupying themselves with explaining what the Wasteland was about and following all these false trails that he'd laid down in the notes.
Eliot, as a poet, emerged at a time when English literature as a university discipline was becoming more and more prominent, with critics in England like I.A. Richards and in America like Clarence Brooks, who were, as it were, becoming the new gurus in the academic establishment. Now, Eliot, I think, who was nothing if not astute, realized this fact. And it could be said, I think, without overstating the case, that Eliot started to write poetry which would be not only approved of by the academic establishment, but could be studied by that academic establishment. I think he realized that immortality, if such it was to be, or at least fame, was to be garnered from the universities as much as from the newspapers. And I think he started to pitch his poetry in that direction.
And there has been a huge industry. These must be the 17 or 19 most annotated pages in the history of English literature. And it seems to me that in the end, we're actually getting there. It's very important that we do understand the poem properly. And every time one reads it, one discovers something new, something fits better. And I think actually what's happened is the explanations have in fact got simpler. It is clear now, after all this mulging around, after all every cupboard has been turned upside down, every bed has been looked under in English literature, after all of this, it's clear that there are three main strands in the poem that we have to bear in mind. Fertility myths.
Okay, so this is talking about how T.S. Eliot, he was deliberately shaping his poetry to try to extract the most fame by providing all sorts of literary illusions that would provide careers for English literature professors, that they could devote themselves to mauling his work, The Wasteland, and he'd just make it so abstruse and make so many difficult to find allegories and similes and metaphors and allusions, and that he would provide a whole cottage industry for English literature professors to just delve into his work. So was he writing poetry primarily to provide joy for those who enjoyed reading poetry? No, not really. He was writing poetry in particular with regard to The Wasteland in a way that primarily English literature professors would enjoy. So too with politics. The theme of this show is that marginalized people are attracted to marginalized movements are attracted to marginalized people, because let's say you are 33, you work for $11 an hour, you don't have a woman, or you have a spouse who doesn't want to have sex with you. Here are three basic alternatives. You can sign up for 5 to 10 years of insight-oriented psychotherapy on a weekly basis. So that's going to be expensive, confrontive, demanding, and uncomfortable. Or you can join, say, a 12-step program to address your drinking or your porn use or your excessive video game use. Again, you'd have to attend meetings every day. You'd have to get a sponsor. You'd have to work the 12 steps. Very painful, very confrontational, very demanding. Or you can say, hey, the reason for my problems, it's simple. It's the Jews, or it's the elites. And you can join in with all sorts of online conspiracy communities. You can hang out on 4chan. You can make memes. You can feel like you're part of an online army. And you've got community, you've got camaraderie, and you've got explanations for your problems that don't require you to make any painful internal changes. They don't require you to engage in deep self-introspection, examination, or confrontation. You can just say, hey, my problems are outside of myself, and whenever I go to this particular live stream, then I can get 15 new reasons that day why my problems primarily reside outside of myself. And so I think for people in their 20s and 30s whose lives are failing, they can say, hey, I feel really tired. Maybe I got chronic fatigue syndrome. They can get on disability if they're failing at life. They can find some kind of faith-saving illness where they can retreat from life, or they can embrace conspiracy theories. They can deaden their pain with alcohol or pornography or video games, or by embracing conspiracy theories. So I'm reading this book, Enlarging America, the Cultural Work of Jewish Literary Scholars, 1930 to 1990, and it refers to this one professor at Smith College, Daniel Aaron, wrote a famous book, Writers on the Left. And he noted that many writers joined or broke from communism because of their wives, or for reasons of their career, or because they read their own inner disturbances into the realities of social dislocation. So the subject matter of politics, left-wing politics, in this case, communism, was often simply the vehicle for non-political emotions and compulsions. I think that's such sharp analysis. For example, let's say that your primary purpose in life, the thing that brings you the most pleasure, is banging. All right, if you want to bang as many people as possible, probably best that you not be religious and that you not get married and have kids, right? So if you want to bang, probably go for a secular approach to life. So embrace atheism. Also, generally speaking, I would suspect that the women you meet in left-wing social and political and cultural circles are going to be a lot more easy to get into bed than women you would meet in right-wing movements. So I think many people join cultural and political and social movements to the left so that they can bang, because that's what their peers are doing. That's the way to get ahead in academia. That's the way to get prestige in cultural endeavors, because the high ground in America and in the West in areas of culture in areas of academia, it's occupied by the left. So if you want to get ahead, you would do well to align your politics and your aesthetics with the politics and the aesthetics of the dominant class. So what is the book? It is Enlarging America, the cultural work of Jewish literary scholars, 1930 to 1990. But I have a friend who blew up his life after reading Mein Kampf. And it's kind of hard to disentangle like why somebody blows up their life, like particularly after reading a book like Mein Kampf. I don't think it was the sublimity of the prose, the beauty of the logic. I don't think it was the overarching vision of National Socialism that caused my friend such dislocation. Rather, I think what happened was reading it was kind of the culmination of a journey he'd been on for a few years where he felt, hey, I've been playing by the rules. I've been listening to my professors. I've been doing the things that you're supposed to do. And now I realize that I've been lied to. And I did not consent to being lied to. And I'm tired of being lied to. And here's just the latest example. I've been told that Mein Kampf is the most evil book ever written. And I can pick up this book and I can read it. And it is funny. And some of it strikes me as true. And I can identify with the main character in this book. And so here we are. We got a book, Mein Kampf. It's supposed to be the most evil book ever written. And yet I get it. I get where the guy's coming from. I'm not necessarily subscribing to everything he says, but it seems eminently reasonable. And so I'm tired of being lied to. I'm tired of having to play, these politically correct games. I'm tired of this whole system that I feel enslaved to, that I feel is constricting me. And so embracing kind of a distant right vision, then it becomes what, an emotional compulsion. It becomes a way to read your own inner disturbance into history and say, hey, this guy Hitler, he was a bit disturbed too. He was a bit constricted too. He was tired of being lied to too. Like me and Hitler, we got a lot in common. So I think a big reason that people choose their politics is so that they can bang, right? People will choose a type of politics where they're going to have the most opportunity to bang. And think about Larry David and that show he did about Palestinian chicken, where he starts sleeping with that Palestinian chick, and he makes the point that the penis has no homeland. So you may join the alt-right because you find this online community that you resonate with. You can make memes together. You can be a hero in this small community, and this community tells you that most of your problems lie outside of yourself. Or you may want to join some other like left-wing ideology to fit in with the cool crowd where you want to get ahead, say in academia or in culture or in, for example, the Screenwriters Guild. That's, basically a communist organization. It's a very left-wing organization. You want to get ahead as a writer in Hollywood. Well, the people who dominate the Screenwriting Guild are on the left. So I also think religion is often a vehicle for non-religious emotions and compulsions. So let's say you want to say, screw you, mom and dad. I remember I had this girlfriend and she wanted to send her dad a photo of her split beaver and say, Dad, look, I'm a sexual being, deal with it. Okay, so if you want to flip the middle finger to your parents, then a convenient way to do that, if religion or politics is important to your parents, is to choose the opposite religion and the opposite politics from your parents. And that's a way to say, screw you, mom and dad. Or if you don't like the community that you grew up in, then you choose a religion or a politics opposite from that of the community you grew up in. So I think politics, religion, often vehicles for emotions and compulsions and desires that really have nothing to do with religion or politics. And then art. Again, TS Eliot probably wrote The Wasteland with an eye to this growing field of English literature to provide a cottage industry for all these scholars so that they could devote themselves entirely to him. I remember in my heyday of blogging, the various academics would interview me, and for a while there, pretty much every day I was getting interviewed by an academic or a journalist, and so that then had an effect on my blogging. So I tried to put things into my blogging that intellectuals and journalists and academics would find interesting, even though ostensibly it was a blog with daily news and gossip about the pornography industry. So I think people adopt religion, politics, aesthetics, artistic endeavors for reasons of career, for romantic reasons, for sexual reasons, for pragmatic reasons, or to read their own psychic disturbances, their own inner disturbances out into society. So instead of confronting what's going on inside themselves, they say, oh, no, it's really what's going on is that there's this dislocation in society. There's this problem with society. Our elites hate us and want us dead. It's a lot easier to take the attitude, our elites hate us and want us dead, than to sign up for 5 years of weekly inside-oriented psychotherapy. And a friend says, look, I'm having a lot of nachas. You're essentially preaching nihilism. Where Larry David's Palestinian chicken episode was brilliant for putting all this into a comedy and a story. The penis does not have a homeland. So I suspect that much of the motivation for producing art is to get laid and to proclaim yourself smarter and superior to other people. I have a Jewish friend who says, I'm very much into reconciliation with the new generation of Germans because I want to bang German chicks. I'm much more easily militant regarding Arabs for opposite reasons. And wow, that Nashville 5G bomber, apparently he gave a 29-year-old woman 2 homes worth $400,000 last year.
Well, you could regard that as a question about time. That's to say, you might say
this is a discussion of literary modernism.
That modernism began in, say, the 1890s, coming after aestheticism, and went on perhaps to the end of the 1920s. Or you could regard it in terms of figures. You could say modernism is what people like Eliot, Joyce, Pound, Virginia Woolf did. But if you try and do it, as you're suggesting, by theme, or something that holds all these together...
And maybe modernism is that which gets you laid. Maybe modernism is that which gets you an academic following. Maybe modernism is a good career choice. Maybe modernism is what is cool with your peer group or with the group that you aspire to join.
That is very difficult. I suppose you might take, though, the notion of fragmentation. The idea that the world is breaking up. I think there are various movements in the culture that made modernists feel that. Quite diverse movements. For example, you had Einstein and relativity, the notion that the physical world is suddenly quite different, that time and space no longer exist as they had been understood to. In the political world, you have democratic movement. You have, of course, Marxism, socialism, communist revolution. You have movements also, I think very important movements, in education. You have, for the first time, a mass readership produced by alterations in educational legislation in the 1870s and the following decades, and you therefore have the rise of popular newspapers and popular culture. So these different movements led, I think, to fragmentation in an obvious sense, in that the old patterns of life and culture were breaking up, and fragmentation in a quite specific literary sense, that plots and characters and poems that made sense, were coherent, somehow no longer seemed adequate to the culture that they were facing.
Well, that's a very comprehensive statement. Would you like to comment on or add to that, Valentine Cunningham?
Yes, I think there is a dominant theme of, as it were, fragmentariness running through the sort of literature that we think of as modernist, and also, of course, parallel events going on in music and painting. I think we have to ask what drives these results in aesthetic product, as it were. And I do think that a kind of dominant sort of force really is kind of scepticism. There is a converging at the end of the 19th century of a great series of attacks in various ways on what you might call order and hierarchy and patriarchy, and the idea that truth is desirable even, let alone knowable.
Okay, regarding that Nashville 5G bomber, 29-year-old mother was given 2 homes worth $409,000 for free by the man identified as of interest in the Nashville Christmas Day bombing. Michelle Swing, 29, she lives in Los Angeles, claims she was unaware that Anthony Quinn Water, 63, signed these properties over to her. She says this is all very weird to me. She declined to say whether she'd ever met the guy or whether she had any family links to him. So here's a picture of her. Nope. There we go. So I wonder why he signed over his property to her. 2 homes worth approximately $140,000. You wouldn't be able to get many homes in Los Angeles for $400,000. Apparently the guy blew himself up. She claims she had no idea that these homes were transferred to her.
Today, I will introduce a new product.
Widespread Wi-Fi cell phone outages hit Tennessee and Kentucky after the blast. So maybe this was like the 5G blast. All right, mate. I know what you want. You want more on literary marketing.
And this has great consequences for writing. You get, as it were, the collapse of confidence in writing, the arrival of impressionism, of hesitancy, as James Joyce liked to play with the notion of hesitancy. You get grand metaphors running through the literature, as well as through painting, particularly painting.
So I have a Jewish friend who says Richard Spencer is the best political pundit. Richard has a tweet here. The recent battle over the elusive $2,000 COVID relief checks is an expression of the endless, meaningless stupidity of the Trump administration. It is and always was fake politics. From what we've learned, $600 payments was what Trump and Mnuchin were bargaining for from the beginning. Thus, Trump's claim that Congress let the public down with a measly $600 is mendacious, oblivious, self-deceiving. For a few days at Christmas, Trump's fans were able to imagine him as a populist who's in touch with the people. In fact, Trump only gets in touch with the people when there's blowback to his clueless, ill-conceived policies, and he skirts responsibility. Trump simply recognized that he messed up once again and wanted to punish Mitch McConnell for his disloyalty. A veto would have been an interesting power play, but you can't expect something consequential from this carnival barker. Removing troops from the Middle East, the wall, the government shutdown of 2018, 2019, COVID relief, healthcare, it's all the same story. Trump lacks a policy vision and macro strategy, mainly because he surrounds himself with the worst combination of people, conventional Republicans and goofy MAGA morons. Trump's pattern is thus to implement conventional Republican policies, which have always been unpopular, and then rage against them on Twitter on behalf of his fan base. It is an utterly toxic situation. Okay, let's get back to the good stuff.
Which have to do with the fading of a keen, certain light on experience and the world and so on. John Gay talks about, mentions things going on in the scientific apprehension of the world. And yes, they come in very, very much. You have the collapse of grand narratives, whether Christian or otherwise, and the introduction of a grand kind of metaphoric atmosphere of dubiousness. We live in the flicker, says somebody in Conrad's Heart of Darkness, and this notion of the light of knowledge being a flickering light from now on. It's not actually.
I remember when my buddy Robert Prosper was in here and he said, "Look, this show's not working. This is boring. You can't just read stuff. Nobody wants to watch a show where you're just reading stuff, and nobody wants to watch a show where you're simply playing other people's materials. Like, this show's not working. Like, go back to square one. There's absolutely no point to you doing the shows that you're doing. There's no upside for them. You're not benefiting. Other people aren't benefiting. Nobody's watching. You know, why are you wasting your time producing this nonsense, this Narishkeit, this foolishness, unless you're doing your good stuff on another channel?" And Laponius Maximus responded to him, no, this show where Luke reads, endlessly, and then breaks up the tedium of Luke's droning reading, breaks up the tedium by playing, other people's work. No, this is the good stuff. It's not like there's this, whole good quality that Luke is putting out there on, exclusively on D Live. And it's just when he comes to YouTube that he just turns in an inferior effort, doesn't even put any effort into it, just reads a bit, mumbles a bit, and then plays other people's work. No, it's not like there's this whole genre of like great Luke material on some other channel. No, this is the great Luke material. All right, this is who I am. In December 28th, 2020, here I stand. I can do no other. So help me God. This is the good stuff. You want the good stuff? I will give you the good stuff. This is me at my best, playing the BBC.
Accidental that the cinema with its flickering image was called the flickers. And Eliot's very preoccupied with this notion of only being able to perceive things in a kind of flickering light. And this has grand consequences for the idea of what narrative does and the kind of knowledge you will arrive at through narrative, and also for a sense of what the person is, what the subject is, what the family is, and so on. The knock-on effect of these great kind of sceptical drives is absolutely enormous at this period, and the writing inhabits this atmosphere.
Laura Marcus, would you like to put your perspective on that? I realise that these two professors have left
this is the good
perhaps
stuff,
very
guys.
lean
This
pickings,
is
but
as
even
good
so,
as I get.
can you perhaps address for us
I'm never
where
gonna
this
get any
came
better than
from,
this.
where this might have started from?
This is like,
John
this is
Gariepy.
peak Luke. All right, this is Luke Ford at his best. He's playing the BBC. All right, so I was talking to a friend a little earlier, and he said, what happens historically to superpowers and empires when they collapse? Is it always civil war? And so I said, no, usually it's not civil war. So the Soviet Union collapsed, didn't collapse through civil war, and Rome collapsed. And even though there were civil wars in the history of the Roman Empire, primarily it was not civil war that ended the Roman Empire. Usually what happens when an empire or superpower collapses is that the benefits of belonging to the empire become exceeded by the costs. So the British Empire is effectively collapsed after World War II. The Soviet Union Empire collapsed in the early 1990s, and the Roman Empire collapsed in the 5th century. And so what precisely did that mean? It meant that on the margins, incrementally, the benefits of belonging to these empires eventually became superseded by the costs. And in the case of the Soviet Union, the military intimidation factor, the Soviet Union simply had Eastern Europe by the scruff of the neck. So you can disable a cat or a dog or many animals or even a human being just by grabbing it around the back of the neck. We have more joints in our neck than any other part of our body. So that means a joint is bone connecting with bone. So you can immobilize someone just by seizing control of their neck. And so the Soviet Union was able to essentially immobilize Eastern Europe for about 35 years after World War II. But generally speaking, with the British Empire and the Roman Empire, what happens is that on the margins, the benefits of belonging to the empire became exceeded by the costs. Also, when you get a civilization that prospers, it attracts people of different genetic stock than those who develop this winning civilization. So people of different genetic stock flood in to civilization, and then they inherently will dissolve the civilization because they are not made of the stuff that can sustain civilization. Also, with civilization, with the superpower status, good times breed lazy people. Lazy people breed dissolution. Hard times make hard people. So with success, you tend to get dysgenic trends. With a successful civilization, the more intelligent tend to spend more of their time in abstract pursuits because they no longer have to focus on survival. As they spend their time in abstract pursuits, they also, with affluence, they tend to become less religious. When you become less religious, you tend to have fewer children, right? So you get dysgenic trends whereby the stupid people are out producing the intelligent people. So in the West, between about the 12th century and 1850, intelligent people, generally speaking, had more children than unintelligent people. After the Industrial Revolution, all sorts of people who would have otherwise died not only survived, but they reproduced. So after 1850 in the West, stupid people started having more children than intelligent people. Intelligent people started becoming increasingly secular and skeptical. They stopped practicing religion, and with their secularism and their skepticism, they stopped having kids. And so we have steadily gotten dumber since 1850. Now, has every empire or great power violated human rights to facilitate their rise? Yes, without a doubt. Human rights are entirely an artificial construct. They have no basis in reality. The strong have always taken what they want, and the weak have always endured what they must. So what distinguishes empires is not their degrees of sensitivity to human rights. What distinguishes empires and superpowers is the rhetoric they use when they subjugate you, when they enslave you, and when they slaughter you, and when they rape you. So the Nazis used a particular type of rhetoric. The Soviet communists used another rhetoric. The Chinese communists used other rhetoric. The United States of America used rhetoric of democracy and human rights. Britain used other rhetoric to justify, they're really bringing enlightenment. So all thrusting superpowers that turn into empires will violate the rights of outgroups because essentially, statistically speaking, nobody cares about outgroups. So as powerful nations rise in power and turn into empires, they routinely enslave, violate, and rape other groups. Now, where do the highest IQ people get their news? Which news sources have the highest IQ consumers? That would be the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. What would be the costs that would make it too prohibitive to belong to the American empire? Well, the main cost would be belonging to the American empire prevents you from belonging to the Chinese empire. So if countries get a better deal belonging to the Chinese empire, they will shift their allegiances to the Chinese empire. Are there any truly independent media sources? Well, every opinion journal is subsidized, right? No opinion journal pays its own way through subscribers and through advertising. But there are news sources that pay their own way, such as the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal. They pay their own way through subscribers. Increasingly, they are funded by subscribers, particularly the New York Times, and less so by advertising. So do I believe that the New York Times, Wall Street Journal are truly independent and not subject to their owners' influence? Yes, of course, they're still affected by their owners' influence. But you can see the shift in the New York Times as they've moved from a publication that's primarily funded by advertising, so they're a little more even-handed when that was the case, to now they are primarily funded by subscribers who primarily subscribe for the benefit of reading op-eds justifying a left-wing perspective on the world. So the New York Times has become much more woke and much more left-wing as it moves from a primarily advertising-funded organization to a subscriber-funded organization. Okay, let's get back to the good stuff.
As mentioned the 1890s and talked about following asceticism. Is there any sense we can get a grip on where this movement, which Valentine Cunningham described in such massive terms, where it was seeded?
Yes, I mean, I think one of the things we need to think about is the very term modernism and the way the intense awareness of the new, Pound's war cries make it new, comes from, that it comes out of the promise and predicament of being modern. I would take it perhaps further back from 1890 to somewhere around the 1850s. Baudelaire is a key figure for us, and I think we need to be thinking about the cosmopolitanism, the pan-European nature of the movement, as well as specificity of the Anglo-American modernisms that we might want to go on to talk about. So I think the urban is something that we link with Baudelaire, and the flicker and the flickering and the fleetingness, the passingness of it all is coming up very much out of the new.
Remember, this is the good stuff. This is Luke Ford at his absolute apex.
Metropolitan experience, which these movements are arising out of. We need to think about the avant-gardisms of the late 19th century, of which modernism is one. And modernism in some ways subsumes the avant-garde, but we might also want to think about these specific avant-garde movements, futurism, surrealism, aestheticism, earlier symbolism, and the relationship to that more all-encompassing movement that we call modernism, that shares so many of those features, particularly the questions of rupture and newness and a kind of revolutionary aesthetic.
There's a self-consciousness about people at that time, which...
Okay, I don't want to give you too much. I don't want you to overdose here. It's such brilliant content. Going to the chat, Media Hit says, I just got back from lunch with my mom. NPR playing on the radio, a story about the new George Floyd Plaza built near where he died, and wonderful black poets performing and being interviewed. And Laponia says, you can't handle the good stuff. Luke doesn't want to overwhelm his audience with the really good stuff. He's just sparing you guys. It's plateau time with Luke. There's no stopping the cycle, says Glib. Don't despair, though. Be like Bronze Age pervert and stand athwart history yelling gay and post lots of pictures of undressed muscular men. Delicious Taco says that the New York Times is the Lifetime channel for upper middle class women. How does Luke square the circle on New York Times conspiracies like systemic racism or sexism? Well, I know that the New York Times is a left-wing publication that promotes certain ridiculous left-wing conspiracy theories. So I take that for granted, and I tend to skip those articles and just go for the good stuff like it's sports coverage. John says, the elites don't actually believe these things like systemic racism and sexism. It's just propaganda for plebs to divert attention from themselves. I don't believe that. On the other hand, I'd have to think it through, because there is a remarkable degree of freedom in certain elite circles, freedom of discussion. It's just depends how you frame things, how you articulate things. You can have quite a good deal of freedom. All right, what's going on with Pornhub? That's what you're probably wondering about. Pornhub squarely targeted in bipartisan bill to regulate sex work online. So senators from both parties have introduced a new bill that would impose sweeping new regulations on online porn sites, platforms, and apps that host porn content. So the bill is meant to prevent exploitation and trafficking. Critics argue the changes would create significant new risks and costs. Okay, so my basic commentary is that the hardcore porn industry is fairly unregulated, and that cannot continue, right? So basically, the attitude of the political establishment towards the hardcore porn industry has been hands off. We don't want to dirty our hands with getting too regulatory of these dirty, filthy pornographers, and this cannot continue. There's no way that people will just be able to keep uploading hardcore porn, and that major credit card processors will facilitate that. Is Luke the only man in America who subscribes to the New York Times to read the sports section? South Bank show or in our time? This was the BBC show In Our Time. Okay, so let's talk about Pornhub. So, according to Senator Ben Sass, Richard Spencer's favorite, this new legislation will require all online platforms that host pornography to put in place critical safeguards to protect Americans from sexual exploitation online. So, whether or not this bill passes, it is inevitable that pornography will be more regulated and more restricted with more government oversight in the future. There's no way that a first world civilization can allow this open sewer just to flow right down Main Street. So for various reasons, we've had this open sewer just, running right down Main Street since the rise of the internet. So any kid can log on and watch hardcore pornography. And you might think that I'm jaded, right? Just because in the course of my journalistic duties when I was a seminal blogger writing on the adult industry, you might say, oh, Luke, he's watched dozens of women take, hundreds of loads to the face, and this has morally desensitized him. And let me tell you, this would morally desensitize, the average bloke. But I'm not the average bloke. I was the Charles Krauthammer of double penetration. I was the George Will of the lesbian gangbang. I was who's that guy who wrote Liberal Fascism? I was the Jonah Goldberg of the blowjob compilation. Who are the other? I was the Paul Krugman of Blacks on Blondes. I was the who's that Sheila who writes for the New York Times and op-ed? Oh, I was the Maureen Dowd of Bang Bus. All right. So I only went in and investigated the porn industry essentially because God told me to. So in the Bible, you'll see that God tells the prophet Hosea that he needs to go out and marry a prostitute, because if he goes out and marries a prostitute, then he will experience vicariously what God experiences when his chosen people, Israel, is unfaithful to him. And so I don't know why God said to me, porn, Luke, go out, investigate pornography, wrongdoing. Be willing to offer up your honor. Be willing to take the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. Be willing to trash your own reputation. Be willing to trash your family's reputation. Be willing to never get married and reproduce. Be willing to be an anathema. Be willing to be a scapegoat. Just like in ancient Israel times, the whole community would figuratively place their sins on one scapegoat and then send the scapegoat out into the wilderness. Well, that's what God called on me to be. He said, look, I need you to be the scapegoat for the sins of the world. They're spilling their essence all over the dusty soil, and I need you to make them pay for each sperm that can't be found. So I'm going to figuratively cover you, Luke, in the world's wanking sins. And I know that you're man enough to handle it. So you're going to absorb the world's sins for its excessive use of pornography, and everyone's just going to take their guilt from using this nasty product, and they're just going to project it onto you, and they're going to blame you, and they're going to send you out into the wilderness carrying the world's sins. And I said, okay, God, if that's what you want me to do, that's what I'll do. So, according to this new legislation, there'll be sweeping verification guidelines for any sites that host adult material. Well, do you remember Tracy Lords? So Tracy Lords was doing a bunch of pornography starting at about age 15 because she was highly developed for, I was the Sam Donaldson of smut. Okay, so Tracy Lords, I think, started making porn at about age 15, but she looked 18. And quite a few of the porn directors, they also got to have a private pluke. And then it came out when she finally made a porn video when she turned 18 maybe she went to the FBI, or anyway, the law enforcement find out that almost all her videos were when she was underage, and so they all became illegal. So about the only legal porn that was left was the one that she had owned. And so after, as a result of the publicity that Tracy Lords had been making pornography from age 15, he had all this sweeping legislation requiring age verification for anyone who performs in porn movies. So prior to 1977, if you went into porn shops, you could find underage porn. So though the porn industry since 77 likes to say, hey, you know, we have nothing to do with child pornography, everything we do is legal. Well, prior to 77, in porn shops all across America, you could find underage porn. When the porn industry could make money from trafficking in child porn, it trafficked in child porn. Okay, so the same people who dominated the porn industry after 1977 were pretty much the same people who dominated it prior to 1977. So the people who used to make bank trafficking in child porn, they only stopped trafficking in child porn after 1977 because Congress passed legislation against child porn. Then after the Tracy Lords controversy in the 1990s, you get all this new age verification. Then as a reaction to the spread of HIV in the industry self-regulated and required that its performers get HIV tests. And then you have counties that start adding more regulation that all the performers have to wear condoms or have to wear personal protective equipment, essentially, when making porn. So it's inevitable that pornography will become increasingly regulated. And if it's not this regulation, it will be something else. Okay. So the bill creates sweeping verification guidelines for any site that hosts adult material. Any user who uploads material to such a site would have to verify their identity with the site. Every single video posted would have to come with a signed consent form from every individual who appears in the video. All pornography platforms would be required to disable downloads of videos they host. Now, that doesn't make sense. You can't really disable downloads. I mean, anyone with any computer sophistication knows how to download videos. Sites would be required to post instructions for how to have a video removed from the site. So essentially, they're making it much, much more difficult to operate porn sites. Platforms would be required to operate a 24-hour hotline for individuals and law enforcement to use for requesting takedowns. Videos flagged to that hotline would have to be removed within 2 hours of the call. Anyone who indicates to a site owner that they do not consent to appearing in a specific video would have to be added to a database that effectively makes a do not upload list. Any new material would have to be checked against that list before appearing on a platform. So it's inevitable that there's going to be further regulation, because just think of this metaphor. Down the main street of your town is an open sewer, and all the children in your town, all the male children anyway, and many of the female children are playing in that open sewer. And so you might say, hey, we've had an open sewer running through town for 25 years. Nobody's died from it, right? Nobody dies from an overdose of pornography. It's not really a big deal. Well, inevitably, if you have an open sewer flowing through your community, inevitably there will be restrictions on that sewer. There will be restrictions, first of all, that it needs to go underground, that it needs to be in pipes, that its contents need to be monitored and regulated, that access to it needs to be made more difficult, not just for children, but for adults. So essentially, pornography is an open sewer running through communities all over the world. It's inevitable that there will be this sort of legislation. And there's also going to be more and more legislation about working conditions. So there's virtually, until the last 15 years, there's been virtually no legislation on working conditions in pornography. So P.J. Hofstadter wrote January 12, 2003 for the Los Angeles Times. So the Los Angeles Times in 2002, they dedicated 2 full-time reporters to the porn beat. And I got to know both of them, P.J. Hofstadter and Ralph Framolino. During the production of the 1997 movie Mimic, the American Humane Association representatives wandered through the Los Angeles set, ensuring that a herd of cockroaches was well taken care of. Licensed animal handlers were to follow state and federal anti-cruelty laws designed to protect the insects, which had been trained to swirl around actress Mira Sorvino's feet. The roaches had to be fed at a certain time. The cockroaches could only work for a few hours each day. They could not be harmed. So there's a whole genre of women crushing cockroaches beneath their high heels. Not on this set. At the same time, in studios in the San Fernando Valley, scores of other actors and actresses were working on movies. They put in long hours, commonly without meal breaks. They often worked without clean toilets, toilet paper, soap, or water. They were exposed to a host of infectious and sometimes fatal diseases. These performers were making heterosexual adult films for an industry that in California is entirely legal and utterly unregulated. This produces taking several $1 billion annually. And videos and internet sites are watched by a public whose appetite seems insatiable. They pay taxes, lobby in Sacramento, and contribute to political campaigns. Yet actors and actresses are discouraged from wearing prophylactics during filming because porn producers believe the public wants to see unprotected sex. So adult porn stars commonly engage in sexual acts with scores of partners, then return each evening to their private lives. These folks are a reservoir. They don't just have sex with one another. They have sex with regular people outside the business, doctors, lawyers, teachers, your next door neighbors. Now, politicians and law enforcement don't believe the public is particularly worried about protecting the porn stars themselves. Porn stars, people think they're not worth the time. The public sees porn stars as disposable. But if they're transmitting diseases into the greater population, the good people, it will be inevitable that you will have regulation. All right, let me get back to the good stuff. Nick Fuentes.
Be great again.
Here's who you get to rally with when you disavow Nick Fuentes. That is so true. Let's see. Classical theist says, very odd how all this Wignat imagery comes out of the woodwork just as IRL nationalist events become more and more common, almost as if it's instigated by a handful of malicious actors who know exactly what they're doing. Only people who want to do you harm would psyop you into thinking resembling Mike Enoch isn't going to make you look like a dumb idiot. LMAO. I realize a lot of impressionable teenagers who weren't politically aware during Charlottesville are kind of swept into this, but this is literally who you're emulating. That's a great point, actually. And then he throws up the Hindback people, TWP. Yeah, unironically, this is who Richard Spencer brought on. When Richard Spencer did his college tour, by the way, Richard Spencer's college tour cost him $100,000. He did 3 stops. He did Auburn, Gainesville in Florida, and Michigan. Cost him $100,000 for 3 stops. In Auburn, that was like a normal event, okay? They had a pretty decent attendance, and they finished their speeches. In Gainesville, 12 of their supporters showed up, and the whole auditorium was filled up with protesters. And the entire time, the protesters were screaming so loudly that nobody could do a speech. It was Spencer and Enoch and Eli Mosley, and they got up on the stage. This is what started the Optic Tour, by the way. I could get into that if people want. But so Spencer, Enoch, and Mosley are on the stage, and they literally cannot even get a word out because the whole room is filled with the opposition screaming so no one can hear them. So at a certain point, Spencer just gives up the mic and starts jumping up and down and dancing because he doesn't know what to do with himself because he's just getting humiliated. Every question is like, why are you retarded? Why are you ugly? And the whole crowd's like laughing, and Richard's like trying to respond. Okay. Now at the Gainesville, Florida rally where this occurs, 2 of Richard Spencer's supporters shot at counter-protesters, shot guns at counter-protesters, and then got arrested. Okay. That was stop number 2 out of 3. So stop number 1, they go to Auburn. They fight a huge legal battle to be allowed to speak on campus, fighting in court, and they do a somewhat normal event. Event number 2, 12 of their people show up. The whole room is full of opposition, screaming them down. They can't finish their speeches. They look like idiots. And 2 of the people that showed up to the speech end up shooting at protesters and getting arrested. At the 3rd speech in Michigan, it was something like 5 of their supporters showed up. 5 people showed up to see Richard Spencer speak. He spoke in an empty room. And then outside of the rally, Richard Spencer brought Matt Hindback and the Traditionalist Workers' Party, dressed in all black with armbands with their symbol on it, throwing up Nazi salutes, and they look like idiots, by the way. They look like total, they're Wignats. I mean, they look like lumpen proletariat. And they're out there getting their ass kicked by Antifa, getting in the scrap, throwing up Roman salutes in these uniforms with armbands. And on the outskirts of that one, I think 2 more people got arrested for gun charges. They got pulled over, and they got arrested for illegal possession of a firearm. And that was the end of the college tour. So, for people that, and it's funny because I've been in this thing now for 3 years. I've been into this since right after Trump got inaugurated, February 17. Trump was inaugurated January 20th, 17. I got into this maybe February 6, 2017. That's when I started my show. And I was involved in politics my first semester in college. So let's just call it fall 2016. So I've been in this for about 4 years. A lot of these younger guys, they got into this with America First, with Gariepy War. It wasn't always like this. A lot of people don't know what it was like. People got into this during Gariepy War. They got into this maybe during Stop the Steal, or they saw the train wrecks debate, or whatever. They weren't here for all that stuff. This was back in 2017. This was fall after Charlottesville. I want to say that was the fall after the Charlottesville rally. Charlottesville was August 2017. So this was the ensuing months in the autumn. And it was out of that Optics Wars was born. I mean, just take a look at what an abject failure that college tour was and Charlottesville was. I mean, they blew $100,000 on this tour, where combined, in 2 events, they had less than 20 people show up to support them. And in those latter 2 events, 4 of their guys got arrested for gun-related offenses. And as the events went on, the optics got progressively worse. In Auburn, it wasn't that bad. In Gainesville, it was a disaster. And in Michigan, it was a catastrophe. This is how it was 3 years ago. And I'm not listening to music anymore. Let me take this off. How does my hair look now? So it was out of this environment that the optics war started. Because at the time, I was doing America First, and I'd also started a media company with James Alsop called America First Media. And me and James got together, we formed an actual company, and the program was this. I was going to do America First. He was going to do his own live show, I think 3 days a week, called something else, America First Overdrive. And we did a podcast together on the weekend called Nationalist Review. And the business was short-lived. I think it started in September and ended in January. Very short-lived. We could get into that. Actually, we can't because of a non-disclosure agreement, but anyway. So it was in this climate that me and James Alsop were doing Nationalist Review, and it was on that show that the optics war began. Because in Nationalist Review, James would say, Gainesville was a great success. And I started to say, no, actually, I don't think it was a success. I said, here's the problem. It really started with the Gainesville, Florida, Richard Spencer college speech. That was the genesis of the optics war. For people that don't know what optics means or what it's about, it started in Gainesville, Florida with Richard Spencer's speech. And so how it went was, I think maybe I'll be able to find it on YouTube. Let me see if I can find it. Let me take a look. Okay.
Which is remarkable in its exactness in a way. When Virginia Woolf says, "Honor about December 1910, the world changed." Now, we know she's talking about an exhibition, but even so, she was onto it, as so many of them were, that things really were changing for them as artists radically. Could you refer to the Virginia Woolf remark?
Yes, I mean, I think what she says is, on or about December 1910, human character changed, and I think it's important that she's actually thinking about the change in the world climate through the notion of the subject, through the notion of subjectivity, and I really do think we need to think about modernism very broadly as a kind of new way of thinking about what it means to be human. This is something Valentine talked about. So Woolf is trying to get at a changing an identity, which he actually does through the idea that the cook is now going to come up to the drawing room and ask you to borrow your copy of the Daily Herald, interestingly the popular cultural reference.
What the hell? What the hell? The cook in this brave new world is going to come up from the kitchen and have the chutzpah to ask me to borrow my copy of the Daily Herald? What the hell, mates? Like, don't people know their place anymore? The world is changing.
So she's seeing class shift as fundamental. That remark is also linked to the fact that it may refer to the first post-impressionist exhibition, which had brought in new ways of seeing, new ways of perception. So class, subjectivity, perception, all coming together in that remark. But I think it's also linking to something which is true in rather more narrowly literary terms about the novel, which is massive investment in how you represent character and subjectivity and identity, which of course takes us back to Ulysses as a prime example of the shifting mobile boundaries of what it means to be a self.
Can we talk about the technique, that how modernists define themselves, John Carey, and how they knew that they were about something new, and how they took that self-consciousness into their work, perhaps with Ulysses an example, or Lawrence, or wherever you want to go?
Yes, well, I think you see that the answer to that question quickly takes us into the difference between these various figures called modernist. Now, Laura talks about that famous remark of Virginia Woolf, human nature changed, human character changed, because of the post-impressionist exhibition. But when you think of that remark, it is extraordinarily elitist. I mean, of course, most people didn't change at all, or even have any high opinion of post-impressionism. It was, of course, mocked in the popular press as daubs and so on. It is a self-consciously elitist remark. And I think the notion that the cook comes up and borrows the Daily Herald certainly does not mean that you no longer have a cook. Very much not. You know, we live above stairs and the servants are down there still. And so I disagree too with Valentine in a way about Of course, he's right that scepticism had come in at the end of the century in various ways, but I don't see modernism, not the central modernists, as being skeptics by any means. I think they were searching for certainties. Eliot found it eventually in, of course, Anglo-Catholicism, Dante, the order of the Middle Ages, so did Pound, the troubadours. They all look back to ancient established culture, and politically, of course.
Okay, I need to warn you guys about hanging out with communists, because all sorts of degenerate behavior occurs. So Granville Hicks, he became a member of the Communist Party in America between 1933 and 1939. He became an instructor in American Studies at Harvard University at the same time. And he became friends with Daniel Aaron, who I mentioned earlier, who wrote that famous book, Writers on the Left. So Granville records a visit he received from Daniel Aaron in December of 1937. Robert Davies arrived with Dan and Janet Aaron, and then John Strachey, author of The Coming Struggle for Power and a well-known British Marxist, came from New York. The evening before Strachey was to leave, Ollie Burke decided that there should be a special entertainment, and she volunteered to do a striptease. Dan was instructed to prepare a poem to accompany the process of disrobing. Robert, John, and I were banished to the study. Towards midnight, we were summoned. Ollie stood in front of the fireplace, slowly removing her clothes, while Dan chanted a mock heroic ode on the class struggle. She was a doll, and when at last she was reduced to an approximation of what would today be called a bikini, John Strachey called out, "Oh my God!" So Strachey was gay. But this is the kind of degeneracy that you'll commonly find at Marxist, communist, left-wing gatherings. They'll draw you in and say, "Oh, we're going to do a striptease, but it's going to be a striptease accompanied by poetry, not by music." So plebs, when they watch a striptease, it's striptease that is accompanied by music, and often very vulgar music, rock and roll music or rap music. I mean, how often do you see a striptease to Beethoven's string quartets? How often have you been to a strip club and watched a striptease to any string quartet? How often have you seen a striptease to the music of Johannes Sebastian Bach? Have you ever seen a striptease to Handel's Messiah? Okay. Have you ever seen a striptease that was accompanied not by music, but by the reading of poetry? So I'm just curious, is there an entirely different aesthetic experience when you take in a striptease that is accompanied by a poetry reading, or say by a string quartet, or by Handel's Messiah, or Snoop Dogg, or Journey, or Air Supply? So to the extent that you have experience taking in a strip performance, what did you find was the most appropriate accompaniment? Was it a poem? Was it an ode? Was it a string quartet? Or was it some vulgar rap music? So be careful of communists. Whole lot of stripping going on. And even though they dress up their stripping with odes to the working class, it's still appealing to our bestial impulses. It still appeals to what is animalistic in us. And is there not something inherently animalistic about doggy position? Like, good people, they do missionary, because then you have that eye-to-eye intimate contact, unless, of course, one of you's got your eyes closed, or maybe you've got your head kind of buried in her neck as you pound away relentlessly, without any rhythmic movement. You're just concentrating on your own pleasure. So you're not even moving your hips around in a circular basis. You're just pound, 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 just because you want to get off, and you got your head buried in her neck. And so there's no eye-to-eye communion. Where is there a meeting of two souls in this kind of animalistic behavior? And then doggy style, you're just behaving like dogs. It's very bestial. It's very animalistic. I just don't think it's particularly elevated. It lacks all panache. It's not civilized. It's very reductive of the human experience. So I want to ask you a second to think, at least a second time, before you engage in any doggy style sex. Okay, Thorsten Veblen, he had this observation about Jewish intellectuals. The intellectually gifted Jew, such as myself, is in a peculiarly fortunate position in respect of the requisite immunity from the inhibitions of intellectual quietism. Yeah, I have been able to overcome my inhibitions of intellectual quietism. I've learned to become positively visible and to share my gifts and my insights and my philosophies with the world. So the intellectually gifted Jew, such as myself, he can come in with such immunity only at the cost of losing his secure place in the scheme of conventions into which he has been born, or in my case, into which he converted, and at the cost of finding no similarly secure place for him in that scheme of Gentile conventions into which he is thrown. For him, as for other men, the skepticism that goes to make him an effectual factor in the increase and diffusion of knowledge among men. This is me. I am an intellectually gifted Jew who is immune to the inhibitions of intellectual quietism. I mean, this is what people have been saying about me on YouTube for years. Like, here's Luke, intellectually gifted Jew. This bloke, he's totally immune to the inhibitions of intellectual quietism. And he's 40, good old 40. He's an effectual factor in the increase and diffusion of knowledge among men. Okay, for him as for other men, the skepticism goes to make him an effectual factor. So that's me. I got the skepticism. I'm effectual. I'm a factor. I participate in the increase and diffusion of knowledge among men. Involves a loss of that peace of mind that is the birthright of the safe and sane quietist. Okay, so by standing here and delivering effectual factors in the increase and diffusion of knowledge, I have lost the peace of mind that is the birthright of the safe and sane quietist. So I've been called many things, but I've not been called quiet, I've not been called safe, and I've not been called sane. So the intellectually gifted Jew becomes a disturber of the intellectual peace. That's me. I'm a disturber of the intellectual peace. I am he who troubles not just Israel, but also the Goyish nations, but only at the cost of becoming an intellectual wayfaring man. Yeah, I'm a wanderer. I'm a wanderer. I just wander. I'm an intellectual gigolo, right? I fall in love with every beautiful idea that comes along, but I'm not faithful to any. But I'm the type of sensitive, intellectually inclined Jew who will never settle down with any one particular ideology. I mean, where pretty ideas are, I'm around. I kiss them and I love them because to me they're all the same. I hug them and I squeeze them, even though they don't know my name. They call me the Wanderer. Yeah, the Wanderer, because I roam around. There's capitalism on my left, and there's paleoconservatism on my right, and there's neoconservatives. They may be the girl I'll be with tonight, and when she asks me which one I love the best, I just tear open my shirt because I've got nationalism on my chest because I'm the Wanderer. Yeah, the Wanderer. I roam around. Now, I roam from idea to idea, from book to book. I go through life without a care. I'm as happy as a clown with my 2 fists of iron, and I'm going nowhere. I'm the type of intellectual that likes to roam around. I'm never in one place. I roam from town to town. When I find myself a fallen for some ideology, I hop right into that car of mine and I ride right round the world. Yeah, I'm the Wanderer. Yeah, the Wanderer. I roam around. Let's go. Yeah, I'm the type of guy that likes to roam around. I'm never in one place. I roam from town to town. When I find myself fallen for some ideology, I hop right into that car of mine and I ride around the world because I'm a wanderer. Yeah, a wanderer. I roam around because I'm a wanderer. Yeah, a wanderer. I roam around. Okay, back to Thorsten Veblen on the intellectually gifted Jew. So he becomes a disturber of the intellectual peace, but only at the cost of becoming an intellectual wayfaring man, a wanderer in the intellectual no man's land. seeking another place to rest, farther along the road, somewhere over the horizon. They are neither a complacent nor a contented lot, these aliens of the uneasy feet, but that is, after all, not the point in question. So Thorsten Veblen's Jews were neither rooted nor religious. This state of intellectual, spiritual, and social orphanhood, Thorsten Veblen considered the precondition for their achievements. And he predicted that if the Zionists were granted their wish and established a Jewish homeland, it would mark the end of Jewish preeminence in the world of science. Rootlessness was conducive to radicalism. Yeah, I'm a wanderer. I'm just the type of guy that likes to roam around. I'm never in one place. I just roam from town to town.
By no means to democracy. Democratization was a dirty word for most of the modernists. So that though skepticism was there, they resisted it. Though democracy was there, they felt it to be alien. But as I say, there are different attitudes. Joyce, I do think, is genuinely different. And, of course, was derided by Virginia Woolf as low-bred. It's the kind of stuff a board school boy would write.
Didn't you call him a pot boy?
I think it was, well, you may have called him a pot boy. I think certainly a board school boy, and how embarrassing it was. The kind of thing you'd expect from a self-taught man, and how we know all how raw they are and so on. That kind of snobbish reaction to Joyce, I think what it signals is how different Joyce was. A thing we haven't mentioned yet is, of course, Freud and Freudianism, and that was enormously influential in the way people regarded the human mind. It links to Valentine's point about the flicker and how the human character, as it's previously been understood, breaks up. And that's partly Freud. And in Joyce, he's following that, of course. He's trying to be real. He's trying to follow a human mind into areas where fiction has never followed it before. When you see Bloom on the lavatory, Bloom masturbating at the scene with Gertie McDougal, these are deliberate attempts to open up literature to life, very much resisted by most of the modernists who thought it indecent. So I think we do come up here against differences between what we call modernists.
I have problems, of course, with that. I have problems with that way of putting it, at least quite so starkly. But I do agree very much that we have to see differences, and we must see, as it were, developments over the period. I stick by the notion of grand skepticisms.
Look, I got some hate porn coming up, but you need to learn about literary modernism first.
Being very important as originators of what we think of as modernism. But of course, a key thing across the ages is that there's never such a thing as a belief vacuum. And what you get is, of course, the abandonment or the shaking of old mythologies, but instantly the kind of rushing in of new ones. And the thing that becomes pretty clear is that within a few years, of what we might call modernist developments. In other words, I think very shortly after the First World War, you get in a kind of, perhaps even before that, a kind of grand re-mythicization. I mean, one shouldn't forget that Eliot, when you...
Okay, speaking of re-mythicization, I wonder what Nick Fuentes has to say.
Here it is. Let's see. Can I get the quality better here?
Come on, Nick. I'm cutting to you, bro.
So... This was a college tour, okay? This is the event that started the optics war. This was October 19th, 2017, okay? See, so it's the fall of 2017. Quite literally, the fall in 2017, right? The fall. Now, I want you to take a look here as they scan the audience. So this is Gainesville, Florida, University of Florida. Second stop on the Richard Spencer College Tour that has now cost, at this point, I think it cost like $70,000. Because I think Michigan cost $20,000, Auburn cost $50,000. It's some kind of a cost breakdown like this. Now, take a look at this room. These are the supporters. These are the people that came to the event. Whoops. These are the people... Can you see my cursor, by the way? I can't tell if you can see that. Yeah, you can. One sec. These are the people that came to see the event. Everybody else in the auditorium is opposition. How many people can you count here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. I can't tell these are people. Let's be charitable. Let's say 19, 20. 20 people in the front row. Okay? Everybody else is opposition. Now, what I said is this is bad optics. What does optics mean? Bad optics means it's not a good look. It's, for example, let's say you host an event in an auditorium that seats 1,000 people, and 100 people show up. And people take pictures of your event, and they see a giant empty auditorium with 100 people in it. 1/10 of the occupancy is filled up. You would say that's bad optics, because what is the optics of this communicate? It communicates that nobody showed up. Good optics would be to have 100 people in a room that holds 50 people and have it overflowing, so it looks like it's packed. That's good optics. Bad optics is this. This is bad optics. That's what I said in the podcast. I said having 20-year guys show up in this stupid uniform, white polo shirt and khakis, and literally take up 2 rows while the entire auditorium is filled with opposition is bad optics. That's what I said. Hang on, I'm going to go get my food. I'll be back in a second. I'm going to go get my food. Hold that thought. Cut right there.
Come on, man. Come on, man.
First we feast. Okay, this fork is dirty. Really? Oh, not on these. My parents always give me a hard time. I'll inspect the silverware before I eat because I want to make sure
He reviewed Ulysses in a famous essay called Ulysses, Order and Myth. He said, we've come to the end of what he called the narrative method, and what the time is now auspicious for what he called the mythical method. And then he rambled on about Fraser's Golden Bough and psychoanalysis.
Had nothing to do with substance. This is a very important point, because it was in response to this event that I started this critique about optics. Okay, now other people might have talked about optics before. I don't really know about anything like that. I know what I was saying 3 years ago. So I know Andrew Anglin claims to have talked about optics. I talked about optics. I'm telling you, this is where it started for me. This is where my journey into the optics war began. I watched this Gainesville speech. I was doing a podcast with James Alsop on Nationalist Review, and James Alsop said this was a great success. And I said it was bad optics. I said it was a failure because the optics weren't good. Again, I did not critique the substance of the speech. I did not critique the substance of the look, so to speak. You know, because a lot of people these days associate optics with, you know, if you're too extreme in your rhetoric, if you're sort of strange in your presentation or fringe in your presentation, then that's bad optics. But initially, optics was about logistics. And I said, for starters, this is not a good look. It's not a good look to have a huge auditorium and only have 12 people show up, or 20 people. That's not a good look. It's not a good look to have 20 of your guys show up in a dumb uniform. It's not a good look to have an audience full of the opposition. This is for openers. Now, the speech goes on, and I'm muting it because actually the content of the speech doesn't matter. I'm muting it. We don't need to hear the speech. I mean, you can watch it yourself. I don't care. But it's because it actually has nothing to do with the content. Because we're talking about optics. We're talking about a look. Okay, so this is what's going on in the auditorium. You've got 20 people in front in their white t-shirt uniform to this big $20,000 event. And this is the entire auditorium. People flipping you off and doing a black power fist. That's not a good look. Now, let's go further on. This is what the presentation looks like for most of the speech. Okay? So you've got Richard Spencer here, and he's in a vest, and he's in a suit with a vest. It's like a three-piece suit, European, very expensive, I'm sure. You've got Mike Enoch in the back here. This is Eli Mosley, and I don't know who this guy is. Now, this is another thing I had a big problem with. I said, look at the stage. The stage is naked. The stage is empty. You have a flag, you have a banner, a poster, a sign. Look at this. This is a disaster. You've got a black curtain, which is standard, and an empty stage. And you've got 4 guys on there. And one guy's giving a speech, and then you got 3 fat guys hanging out. 3 fat guys just hanging out in the back, and they don't know what to do with themselves. You got fat Mike Enoch in his jeans and a stupid button-down shirt. None of this fits. You got fat Eli Mosley wearing the same thing, and then you got Spencer hanging out here in a 3-piece European suit. It doesn't make any fucking sense. Look at this. Look at this. So he's in the vest, and he's really styling and all this. And then you've got fat Eli Mosley stalking around the stage in these smart shoes from Ross. Okay? Look at this guy. Look at this. Look at this jamoke. Okay? Let's get him zooming in again. I want to get him zoomed in again here. This is important. Where is it? Let's get another angle where it zoomed in on him. Now you got Mike Enoch, fat Mike Enoch in these baggy jeans, in this ridiculous outfit. Now you got big fat guy in this outfit. You got, psychopath in the 3-piece European suit. The stage is empty. It's naked. You have an audience full of people that hate you. You have a dozen supporters in the front row. You can see all of them and count them on 2 hands. And they're all wearing the stupid, white polo thing. This is an optical disaster. Now notice it has nothing to do with the substance of the speech. It's not that the speech is too radical. It's not that the message is radical. It's not that you use radical symbols. The problem is, this doesn't look good, no matter who you are. Now compare this with, let's pull up, just for the fun of it, let's pull up Charlie Kirk, OSU Culture War. Now, I fucking hate Charlie Kirk. You know that. And I hate Turning Point USA. But let's just, as a counterexample, let's just take a look at this. Look at this. Let's compare and contrast. On this side, okay, let's get one with the fat guys in the back. Just to really get it all. Soak all this in. So this is the alt-right. This is the alt-right, which is an underdog. They're not well funded, okay? These are people that they claim to have it figured out. Trust us, believe us, buy in. You need to buy into our new right-wing vision. And it requires a lot of faith to buy in because there's a tremendous social cost. Buy into this ideology which you've been programmed to not believe in your whole life, or not think about your whole life. Buy in. Trust us. We know what's up. The whole world is wrong, but we know what's up. Does this presentation communicate that? Does this presentation communicate that we should trust these people? I should abandon everything that I knew growing up and the whole right wing is wrong? No, but these guys have it figured out. Is that communicated well? No. Nope. It looks like shit. Does this communicate that this is a growing movement? This is a movement that is taking the country by storm? Nope.
Analysis and so on, and he brought in Yeats and so on, and that was a very key sort of thing to think of Yeats. And when you think of what happened very quickly in the 20s, is that Yeats and Wyndham Lewis and TS Eliot, somewhat, Ezra Pound definitely, Lawrence definitely, they move, they're attracted towards the new mythicization, and particularly fascism. I mean, they embrace fascistic ideas. You can't live without a myth, you see.
But can we talk just to define modernism for another moment or two before moving on to develop it a bit. Do we have evidence of John Kerry mentioned Freud and 1900, the great book of Freud? Do we have evidence? And Virginia Woolf's, as well, her part in the Hogarth Press. Translated and published Freud in this country. Do you have evidence that Freud was read by modernists, was seized on by Joyce and Virginia Woolf and Lawrence and so on, and the ideas were specifically? I mean, I'm interested in how ideas get there, where they come from, and how to come and really track them passing through, or is it a general kind of infection in the air?
I think it obviously is much more to do with the way influence diffuses itself slowly, though the Bloomsbury group were clearly the key purveyors of Freud in this country. They were the translators and the publishers, and indeed Leonard Woolf was the first person to write a non-medical review of Freud with the psychopathology of everyday life. Woolf claims not to have read Freud until nearly the end of her life, in the late 1930s, and the term that struck her most when she read Freud was indeed ambivalence, which seems to me something we could use to sum up modernism more generally. But there is ambivalence and oscillation and vacillation in Woolf's writing, as in so many of the modernists, from so much earlier on that I don't think we take the date of her literal reading of it as indicative of the influence upon her. It is, of course, very interesting that she was packing the books of Freud in the Hogarth Press, probably sitting on them to write her novels, at the same time as she was claiming not to have read them. Lawrence obviously has a key debate with Freud in Fantasia of the Unconscious and other works. I think he found Freud much too rationalist and too materialist and insufficiently interested. He thought
How do we feel about all these modernist literary figures who were fascists or supporting fascism? What's the connection between literary modernism, eugenics, racism, genocide, and fascism? So please prepare an original essay and submit it to me, and I will read aloud the best entries on this show.
He was too interested in sex in some ways and not enough interested in bodies.
Whereas Freud thinks of the unconscious as actually evil, it's repressed, and it must be repressed for civilization to happen. Lawrence thought quite the opposite. Of course, it must be let out to destroy the old civilization and make a new one. And as for new mythologies, of course, that's true too, but what one has to remember is that some of the new mythologies were deliberately...
Okay, so are we too much interested in sex and not enough interested in bodies? So please prepare an original essay on that theme, and I will read aloud on this show the best submissions.
Chosen because they were exclusive. I mean, Yeats, a figure we haven't mentioned so far, of course went over to Hermeticism, Theosophy and so on, and prized it particularly because it shut out the majority, the mob, the rabble. It shut them out, and indeed Yeats believed they should be destroyed. Yeats wrote on the boiler towards the end of his life, there ought to be a war between the intellectuals and the masses would be destroyed. He said the intellectuals...
And Quantrell Bishop says, running things at twice the speed and twice the audio inputs, maximum learning potential. Funnel Nick Fuentes into the left earphone and British literary scholars into the right earphone and have a mental orgasm.
Would win. He used an analogy of the U-boats, the German submarines that had managed to destroy a huge amount of English shipping because they were cleverer and more technically educated. That's what it would be like. The mob would be wiped out, Yeats said.
Well, let's come to one of the core sentences of one of the sentences in your book, The Intellectuals and the Masses, which ruffled a few.
At the same time as she was claiming not to have read them. Lawrence obviously has a key debate with Freud in Fantasia of the Unconscious and other works. I think he found Freud much too rationalist and too materialist and insufficiently interested. He thought he was too interested in sex in some ways and not enough interested in bodies.
Whereas Freud thinks of the unconscious as actually evil, it's repressed, and it must be repressed for civilization to happen. Lawrence thought quite the opposite. Of course, it must be let out to destroy the old civilization and make a new one. And as for new mythologies, of course, that's true too, but what one has to remember is that some of the new mythologies were deliberately chosen because they were exclusive. I mean, Yeats, a figure we haven't mentioned so far, of course went over to Hermeticism, Theosophy and so on, and prized it particularly because it shut out the majority, the mob, the rabble. It shut them out.
It shut out the wabble. Did you see that? The Hermeticism and Gnosticism is shut out the wabble. That was why Yeats was so appreciative of modernism, because it shut out the wabble. Right. So it seems like modernism, in large part as a literary movement, is about disgust and disdain for the majority, wanting to separate yourself from the people. I mean, I'm a man of the people. I respect elites for the good that they do, but I'm still fundamentally at heart a man of the people. So is modernism and postmodernism, are these simply movements to for intellectuals to separate themselves from the people. So I was asking an English literature professor, like, what's the difference between modernism and postmodernism? And I was told that it's fragmentation, that fragmentation is the key theme of literary modernism. So what the heck's going on here? So is excluding the masses from culture just a key part of this trend towards modernism? So Godward Podcast says, modernism is characterized by a thrill of being something other than traditional. Postmodernism is characterized by not even being aware that the traditional world seriously existed. So modernism says risk experiment. Postmodernism says actually forget all we ever knew. Godward Podcast says fragmentation can be fun. So John Bart's Lost in the Funhouse, or even Jose Luis Borges, or the meta self-referential stuff of modernism seems degenerate to me. Some people think it's just even more modernism. So modernism, postmodernism is modernism squared. It's uber modernism. It's super modernism. It's modern modernism. The language itself becomes more broken. There's Brahmin postmodern literature, which is inaccessible and therefore exclusive. Then there's the fodder for the masses, like Lady Gaga videos that are sort of fragmentary in their zeitgeist. Think about painting, how it became modern with Impressionism, but then burnt out by Pollock and Rothko. After that, nothing seemed like much more than simply marketing. So I didn't realize that modernism and postmodernism were essentially the same thing, that postmodernism is simply modernism squared.
Indeed, Yeats believed they should be destroyed. Yeats wrote on the boiler towards the end of his...
Whoa, I got to disavow this genocidal talk here by William Butler Yeats, who wanted the masses destroyed.
life. There ought to be a war between the intellectuals and the masses would be destroyed. He said the intellectuals would win. He used an analogy of the U-boats, the German submarines, that had managed to destroy a huge amount of English shipping because they were cleverer and more technically educated. That's what it would be like. The mob would be wiped out, Yeats said.
Well, let's come to the one of the core sentences of one of the...
I got to disavow this wiping out of the mob. I mean, who knew that Yeats was so genocidal? Who knew that modernism was a literary movement to wipe out the mob? I didn't know modernism was a genocidal movement.
Provocative sentences in your book, The Intellectuals and the Masses, which ruffled a few feathers and pleased a great number of other people. I'm quoting, the early 20th century saw a determined effort on the part of the European intelligentsia to exclude the masses from culture. In England, this movement has become known as modernism. You've talked about Yeats. Would you like to amplify that a little, and then we can talk about that round the table?
Yes. I think it's instructive to see what sort of readership the modernists were aiming at, catering for, and how tiny it was. TS Eliot's paper, The Criterion, had a print run of 750. It was minute.
See, I'm not a modernist. I'm not a postmodernist. I always try to make my show as accessible to people as possible. I want the 85 IQ person to have just as much enjoyment of this show as the 145 IQ person. I deliberately try to keep dumbing down the content. I try to just make it as broadly accessible as anyone. I don't just like pitch my show at like just, some rarefied intellectual elite, because I'm a man of the people. I want everybody from every race and every religion, if the name's Ahmed or Rashawn or Chaim or Ching Chao Sheng, like I want everyone to be able to appreciate this show. And that's why I try to dumb it down so that even a fifth grader can appreciate, the arguments and the discussion here.
So it regarded, and Eliot is quite specific, I think, about keeping the light of culture alive in an age of darkness. He's very specific about this. He talks about, an interesting factor is the attitude to universal education. Now, you would think universal education, to come in the 1870s and 80s, would generally be greeted by intellectuals as a good thing. You educate a new readership, you educate the mass. Not at all. Nearly all the modern...
Okay, so if all these modernists despise universal education. Sounds like they want to wipe out the masses, that they're committed essentially to mass genocide. It doesn't really sound like that they have the well-being of humanity. And most of them are also secular. So they feel free from the moral scruples of Christianity. They're intent on wiping out the masses. They have disdain for universal education. So they don't even want to improve the masses, to uplift the masses. I devote my life to lifting people up. I raise people up. Like I promise you a bit of leg, all right? I promise you a little bit of porn. I promise you a little bit of hate porn. I tantalize you with, a little bit of race realism here, a little bit of anti-Semitism there. We'll talk about the foundations of fascism here. We'll sing some songs in praising the ethno-state there. But that's just to bring you in for this educative, morally uplifting, recovery-centered, God-centered mission that I have to, just take people where they're at. If they want to talk about the porn, I'll offer them a little bit of porn. They want to talk about the legs, we'll talk a little bit about the legs. They want to talk about stuff that's a little bit above the legs, we'll talk about the stuff that's a little bit above the legs. If people want to sing songs in praise of the ethno-state, they can come on the show and sing songs in praise of the ethno-state. So you come for the porn, but you stay for the Torah, right? I tease you with the hate porn. I tease you with a little bit of, the elites hate us and they want us dead. I suck you in. I reach out to people who've got that kind of conspiratorial mindset, and they want, some dissident right stream. And so I'll give you a little bit of dissident right hate porn. I'll give you reasons to feel, aggrieved. And then I'll transform it through the light of Torah. I would take your filthy, dirty, rotten, disgusting, smelly souls, and I will wash your dirty, filthy, disgusting, smelly souls in the wellsprings of Torah, so that you can be born again to a new life, a life of recovery, a life of clarity, a life without unnecessary compression patterns, a life where you don't squeeze down on your voice box and sound like Kermit the Frog, a life where you're not riddled by back pain and headaches and neck pain and irritable bowel syndrome and chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia and that tick disease, right? No more of those diseases, right? That's what I'm offering you, a path to the promised land where you can let go of your unnecessary body tension. You can let go of your, narrow ideological blinders, let go of the need for the hate porn, let go of the need for the conspiracy theories, let go of the need to feel aggrieved, let go of the need to use politics or religion or art as a way to, act out your emotional compulsions, to try to soothe your own inner anxieties by projecting your own sense of dislocation and aggrievement onto society generally. We're going to move past that. I go to prepare a place for you so that where I am, you may be also. That's what we're doing here. I am preparing a place for you. It's going to be great. Believe me.
Modernists were against it. Eliot said, Lawrence said, of course, that all schools should be closed at once, that boys should learn only primitive methods of fighting and some handicrafts, and girls should learn domestic science. Eliot said that the number of educational institutions should be cut by 1/3, and that we should go back to the teaching orders of the Middle Ages. You should go into a cloister if you wanted to be a student. I mean, they were deeply, deeply retrogressive about.
Whoa, I got to disavow. I'm a man of broad-based, education and education for everyone. I don't care how controversial that sounds. I believe our children are our future, and they deserve the best damn education that we can provide them. I don't care how controversial that is. Have you done your silent la la la's today? Just allow the air to come in. Don't suck it in. Just allow the air to come in, and then. So guys, be like Quantrell Bishop. I came for the silent la la la's. I stayed for the condescension of an Australian Jewish convert. Luke's putting on the ice cream truck driver circling a school zone charm. You're too kind. Too kind.
About education. So when I say that they wanted to exclude the maths, I think that is provable simply by their statements about such subject as math education.
It's wonderful that actually the products of mass education are nurturing the reputation of the modernists more than anyone else at the moment. Valentine Cunningham, would you like to respond to that?
I think we have to be a bit careful about this, myself. We have to acknowledge a definite...
Okay, a bit racy here. I know this is really racy, provocative material that I am feeding you. I am essentially appealing to your worst impulses. I'm essentially tapping into your inner barbarian. And I know this is controversial, but I think we have to be a bit careful here.
Kind of elitist groups and elitist-minded persons and artworks, and the massness of the time, and something like Wyndham Lewis, for example, who espouses fascism, writes the first book in England admiring of Hitler, for example. He is deeply preoccupied. We live in an era of the masses. He's obsessed by that, and one reason why people embraced, it seems to me, fascism was that was a political movement which, as it were, explained or coped with or could deal with the massness of modernity. But there are other things you could do, and one of the things we have to take into account is, for example, the attraction towards communism as well as towards fascism, and particularly...
And the New York Post tweets, Andrew Cuomo staffer hit in head with cinder block during random New York City attack. So when you hear the news media talking about random attacks in, say, New York City, what do they mean? Is that a euphemism? David Pinson responds, random is a euphemism for a black man attacking a white person for no reason. This happened in Midtown Manhattan at 2:15 p.m. Then New York Post, man randomly slashes woman in the back of her head in New York City. So another random, unprovoked attack with a black man attacking a woman. And Jay says, as a daily reader of the New York Post, I've yet to read of a random attack in New York City where the races are reversed. Well, if the races are reversed, then it's not random. It's just toxic white supremacy. It's toxic masculinity, bro.
Say, in the case of Virginia Woolf, her interest in the Labour Party. I mean, she, and then they go to Labour Party conferences. She conducted evening classes at Morley College. She addresses the Workers' Educational Association. She goes to meetings and writes for groups of working women and so on. I mean, she is curiously very conscious of her privilege. She said, I've never stood with my arms up to the elbows in a wash tub. She has a tremendous self-consciousness there of her difference. I think it's a bit unfair, actually, of John to stress only the other side, the snobbery, the anti-Semitism, and so on and so on.
Well, let's take this through and then come back to John Kerry after Laura Marcus has had her say on it.
Yeah, why are these leading literary modernists so anti-Semitic, fascist, genocidal? Right? Why are they so fond of totalitarian genocidal solutions? Disavow.
To bring you back to the quotation that started this particular paragraph from John Kerry's book, the early 20th century saw a determined effort on the part of the European intelligentsia to exclude the masses from culture. Now, what's your response to that? I
think we have to understand that modernism, avant-gardism, these movements are anti-bourgeois. And I think this is true, that what we're all saying is that it could actually go either way. Either the working class gets lumped in with the kind of bourgeoisie as this sort of proletarian mass that has to be resisted, or you can move to or there is this move to the left with working class.
Look, I don't know a whole lot about culture. I never learned a lot about culture or art. I'm not, super informed, but it does seem to me fundamentally true that art and culture and our ruling elites in those spheres for more than 120 years, it seems to me that it's been very important to them to distinguish themselves from the middle and lower classes, that they want to separate themselves from the great mass of their fellow citizens.
being absorbed in as part of or sympathy with the working class being absorbed as part of the artist's approach to the world. I think actually what you find in Woolf very often is much more a loathing of the middle brow, the middle class. And then in various essays she talks about the highbrow and the lowbrow having things to say to each other, but it's the middlemen, the middle brow. And part of the formation of the Hogarth Press was in fact precisely to get away from middlemen of all kinds. So it's the middle class and the bourgeoisie who much more often, it seems to me, are the butt of hatred and contempt. But I think perhaps we have to separate out, as in John Kerry's book, there is a tendency perhaps to see a writer like Wells and his hatred of the mass as identical with the high modernists, the high avant-gardists' dislike of mass culture. And it seems to me that those are not entirely...
Okay, so if there are high modernists, who are the low modernists? Are those the tabloids, or are they the pornographers and the rap artists? Are the rap artists and the pornographers, are they low modernists? So press 1 if you're a high modernist, press 2 if you're a low modernist.
Johnny's shaking his head, which you can't see, but those are not actually the same kinds of resistance to massification and to mass culture.
Oh, no, I never pretended that they were. I mean, I've written 2 chapters on Wells in the book, one showing Wells's fear and hatred of the mass, but the other showing that what Wells tried to do about it. Wells seems to me quite different from any other of the writers of the period at all, any of them, in that he wanted truly to save the world. He wanted to lead a political movement. He had real ideas. It was the most extraordinary thing. I mean, it's very hard to find a match, Tolstoy perhaps, but yep, he of course...
So he's talking about H.G. Wells, the writer of science fiction.
Wrote A History of the World to educate people, came out in serial parts. There were Wellsians around in the early years of the 20th century. William Golding's father was one who truly believed the world could be saved by these new leaders who would be extraordinary. They were called the samurai. They were going to be unpaid political leaders of great idealism who would go on sort of outward bound holidays once a year, would have to have written a book or painted a picture. They were sort of ideal men, and they would lead the world. Actually, a lot of people would be exterminated. He said a lot of people would have to go. But as a matter of fact, many of these seemingly leftist people believe that. Valentine talks about the left, but actually George Bernard Shaw, who went along to Fabian meetings, said that most people in Europe, most men in Europe, had no right to be alive, and a lot of extermination was needed. The left believed that because that's partly why they went for Stalin, who was doing it.
I think it's the question which John raises of eugenic thought, which is one of the things clearly floating around in a very major way at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th, which has become so abhorrent to us in the post-Holocaust years, has to be seen as part of that extraordinary melting pot of ideas, which we've said could go either way, to the good or in our terms, to immense evil, and that one does have to preserve some sense of the kind of historical specificity of these times, and the fact that often, Wells, who does start out saying being a eugenic thinker, actually comes to change his mind later on, partly because he looks at his own puny frame and thinks that he's not sure he would have been allowed to survive had there been such extermination going on.
But I think when she said that...
Well, that sounds a little bit like Norman Hobbes. If he was living in a national socialist state, would Norman Hobbes and much of the alt-right on disability, would they be regarded as useless eaters?
Poetry, it was likely that poetry must be difficult, he said on a famous occasion. I think he was...
talking about Eliot here.
This is T.S. Eliot, yeah. I think he was not only thinking that poetry was likely to be difficult because, it was for a small clientele, but that the times were difficult, and this would make, and ideas have become difficult, and the sense of the person had become made difficult in modern times, and that thus, inevitably, poetry would be more difficult because the times were like that. And so I think we have to add that notion.
The times being...
Well, modernity, and a particularly...
Technology had come in and all that sort of stuff.
Exactly, and particularly the great shock of the new, as you might say, provided by the First World War.
John Kerry?
I doubt that very much. I think all times are difficult. What about the Victorians who had the coming of the railway train? What about living through the Black Death? All times are pretty difficult, and time changes everything all the time. And Valentine said earlier that the axioms of modernism are still alive with us. But I'm not so sure. And on that very point, indeed, about poetry being difficult, well, who are the great English poets of the post-Second World War period?
As for me, time won't give me time, because time makes lovers feel like they've got something real. But you and me, we know we've got nothing but time, and time won't give me time. Don't make me feel any colder. Time is like a clock in my heart. Touch was the heat too much. I felt I lost you from the start. Oh, in time, it could have been so much more. The time is precious, I know. In time, could have been so much more. The time has nothing to show.
Though obviously, Hughes, Larkin, and Heaney.
All of would quibble a little about being English, but
Okay, yeah, in writing in English.
Sure.
I'm sorry, writing English. That's another point, incidentally. But writing in English, and all of them write poems that can be understood by school children. That's another. When I say that's another point, another thing that does not go on for modernism is that a huge amount of English literature now is what is sometimes called post-colonial. It's written by inhabitants of the previous colonies. Modernism has got nothing whatsoever to do with that. Pound and Wyndham Lewis would have been shattered to think that the colonials were going to write the English literature of the future. They've been shattered. It's
Whoa! It sounds like Wyndham Lewis and Ezra Pound. I mean, I know they were fascists, but it sounds like they might have been a bit racist too. Disavow.
absolutely changed. It's not true that they
What is it about modernism that makes people so fascistic and racist and eugenic and genocidal and hierarchical and exclusivist and have so much contempt for the average bloke?
axioms of modernism are still alive. Everything's changed.
Sorry, after you.
I would question that. I mean, I think that it took the work of rupture, it took the break, certainly as they saw it was realist styles.
I'm so glad there's a Sheila on this panel, because otherwise it would have just been toxic white masculinity.
Forms for the post-modern, if we want to call it that, or the post-war generation to be able to write as they did, or indeed for an Auden to be able to return to much more lyrical, direct forms. I think it did. I think there was a difference about this period for political, for social reasons that did mean that there had to be a total break with conventional forms as they'd been known.
Well, the movement seems to me to have gone the other way. That is to say, in the 30s, I think things go in a way that is not sanctioned or anticipated by the modernists. For one thing, the left is embraced. Instead of democracy and the left being rejected as the modernists did, the left is obviously embraced by the 30s writers and poets. They try and make themselves into working people. They chew chocolates to rot their teeth. They wear cloth caps and so on. I mean, their antics have been well documented by Martin Green and others. So that I think is one thing which is not sanctioned or anticipated by modernism. Also, the whole new approach to the mass, which is mass observation, which is political, which is looking what it's really like, going into pubs, documenting them, completely unlike modernism. So I think there's a radical change, and that modernism actually breaks and something else comes.
Yeah, I'd like to just throw into the... please say what you want to say, because, Laura, I know you want to get in, but can I just chuck in this idea of the mass, which we've sat through now for quite a long time in this programme, which seems to me to be a way of wiping out, denigrating and dispensing with the majority of people. It's a useful word. It sort of neuters them and turns them, the masses, into... that word comes up again and again in the conversation, in the ideas about modernism, and is the sort of submerged 7/8, it seems to me, of this iceberg that we could be talking about.
I'm not sure that the mass and modernism, or that modernism is to be so much defined around this question of the mass. I mean, I perhaps would take it back to these questions of identity, subjectivity, the relationship between the interior and the outside world, which obviously relate.
Have I spoken to you guys today about the bigotry of low expectations and how
they're
racist?
Usually pretty racist and they're bad.
I think voter ID laws are a way to perpetuate racism.
Would you go as far as say those laws are racist?
For sure.
Do you think it suppresses the African American vote?
Definitely.
Tell us how.
Because they're less likely to have state IDs.
Minority voters are less likely to have the kinds of IDs that have been described or required.
These type of people don't live in areas with easy access to DMVs or other places where they can get identification.
You can always get IDs you do over the internet. Does that also make it difficult for black people in particular?
Yeah, you have to have access to the internet. You have to be able to pay an internet service provider for service.
Yeah, come on, man. They have to have access to the internet. They have to know how to use the internet, and then they have to pay an internet service provider. I mean, come on, man. You can't expect black people to do these things.
Certain fees. Do you think that's harder for black people to go online?
Well, I feel like they don't have the knowledge of how it works.
A lot of people have.
Yeah, they don't know how the internet works, or a computer, or a keyboard, or a mouse. And I mean, how the heck are these oppressed people going to be able to pay for the very own internet service provider?
Smartphones, but you might not have data.
For most of the community,
they may not have data. They may not be able to afford smartphones.
They don't really know what is out there just because they're not aware, or they're not informed.
I also think there's a repression of black voting with how if you're a convicted felon, you're not allowed to vote and everything. And when you look at swing states like Florida, that's a huge population of the like African Americans.
Yeah, convicted
Now I'm here in
felons.
East Harlem to ask black people their thoughts on what you just heard. Do you have ID normally? You carry ID around?
Yes, I have state ID.
Do you carry ID?
Yes, I do.
Do you know any black person who doesn't carry ID?
No. Everyone that I know has an ID. Why would they think we don't have ID?
That's a lie. Why would they say that?
Do you have ID?
Yes.
Because I have my ID and my friends have their ID, so like we know what we need to carry around.
Everybody that I know have ID. Like, that's one of the things you need to walk around with New York with, ID.
Do you know any black adult who does not have ID?
No, I don't.
Is it a weird thing to even say that?
Yes, it is.
What is this, some type of trick candy camera?
I know, right? That's the only thing I brought with me.
Those are legit IDs. I heard a lot also that black people can't figure out how to get to the DMV.
Really?
What does that say to you?
I know it's that, on 25th Street.
Do you know where the DMV is around you?
It's on 125th Street and 3rd Avenue, I believe.
You know how to get there?
Yeah.
Would you have a problem getting there if you had to get there?
No.
Well, how do you expect them to be able to afford their own internet service provider and learn how to use a mouse or a computer or a keyboard? They have to be able to go online. That they have to have the knowledge of what to do online, and how they ever gonna make it to the DMV, bro. John says, one thing that shows the downfall of the alt-right is the decline of the use of the term ethno-state. Nobody uses it anymore because nobody believes it is possible anymore. It's just a fantasy. The U.S. is heading towards secession, says Jim. The question remains whether it will be peaceful or violent. Well, guess what, Jim? The United States is not headed towards secession, but we're not going to have secession in my lifetime or in your lifetime. But it will power a whole lot of YouTube commentary, but it's not going to happen in reality. Okay, let's go back to the good stuff, where you tuned into this show in the first place.
It's to the question of private and public and individual and social. But this sense of mass, the hatred of the mass or the masses is not for me the absolute defining feature, though there have been interesting arguments made about the relationship between the feminization of the mass, which may explain some of the misogyny that we may go on to talk about.
Mellon Cunningham, then John Carey.
I mean, I would say that, to go back to what John was saying about great crises in the past, there had never been such a crisis for the world as the First World War, and it's not accidental that the mass death is the great theme, and absorbed quickly into the stirrings of what we think of as modernism. The First World War comes to seem as the apotheosis of all these themes about break and rupture and fragmentation and destruction and so on. It's the apotheosis of Wyndham Lewis's blast movement and the futurism and so on. And what is it? It is.
So it's not widely known, but the Nashville bomber was a vanguard movement of the Wyndham Lewis blast movement. He was in the vanguard of that whole blast movement, and it's that literary school of blast which led the Nashville bomber to do what he did on Christmas Day.
It provokes a profound sadness at, as it were, the death of ordinary people, the mass death of men, and that quickly feeds into the great modernist texts like The Wasteland and Jacob's Room by Virginia Woolf and Ulysses and so on, all marked emphatically, it seems to me, by mass slaughter. And I don't think one can separate, as it were, what we've been calling the elitist preoccupations of the aesthetic movement from that profound sense of shock.
Well, my point about the mass in the book is, of course, that the mass doesn't exist, as you said. The mass is a word you use for people you don't know and who are not your friends. It's just the great out there. Therefore, it is infinitely fictionalizable, infinitely plastic. If you configure it as the young men who died in the First World War, of course, it's a sympathetic mass. But if you configure it as the bourgeoisie, as Laura was saying, though they're the same people, I mean, they were the young bourgeois men, it's a deeply horrible mass. The reason why people like Virginia Woolf couldn't stomach the bourgeoisie, but liked the lower classes, was, of course, because they could patronize the lower classes, whereas the bourgeoisie was a real threat to them, was making money. It's very simple, I think, and that's why the peasant figure is such a favourite with modernist writers, the peasant.
Whoa. So are these English literature professors, are they saying that literary movements, artistic movements, cultural movements in the last 100 30 years that they're all primarily about status signaling, that they're really not about art or literature. They're about separating yourself from everyone else to show that you're special. So it's not really about the art. It's not really about truth and beauty and aesthetics and standards, but it's all about showing that you're different and superior to everybody else.
Was tremendously popular with Edward Pound, Wyndham Lewis, Hitler, of course, also very keen on German peasants who were going to farm the Ukraine once he had taken it and exterminated the Slavs who lived there. So peasant is good, but for TS Eliot in The Wasteland, for example, to be a clerk, house agent's clerk, or a typist, that's very bad because you have to do with machines, and machines are bad things in the old William Morris Ruskinian way.
Look, let's just get real here. Confession time. Like, why am I not on Millenniyule 2020? Why haven't I been on Cotter Godfrey in months? Look, I got to be real. I tried to bum rush this chick. Then I sent pics of my God rod to the entire internet. And so everyone's bloody disavowed me for 3 months. And my channel's on life support. But hey, I'm okay, you're okay, it's okay, we all make mistakes. I am learning to love and accept myself, even though I spam the internet with pictures of my God rod.
In the 1930s, machines become good. To work with the machines is good. To be a coal miner is very good, because that's how Orwell and such people configure the math. So the math, of course, doesn't exist at all. It's just a term that we use.
Well, yeah. I mean, let's be more specific here. I don't have a God rod. I have the God forbid rod. So, look, I made a mistake. It's easy to do. We all get carried away. I'm only 54. Like, we all do crazy things when we're 54.
To configure the other that we aren't.
But why then is in the 1930s are the left-inclined writers who are deeply, as it were, at least in spirit, committed to the idea of ordinary people? Isn't it interesting that they take...
Whoa, disavow. So left-wing writers, communist writers, very theoretically inclined towards the good of the ordinary people, turn out to despise the ordinary people? You could knock me over with a yarmulke.
Take T.S. Eliot's Prufrock as a great example of the, quote, little man, the Charlie Chaplin figure and so on, who represents utter ordinariness, precisely in a way represents one of the clerks of the world, you might say, whom, of course, T.S. Eliot came perhaps to feel more distant from as time went on. But when you think of, the Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock as a kind of great, it's a kind of a foundational modernist poem in which the challenged selfhood, who am I, what am I, perhaps I'm this, perhaps, it's no longer possible to be a grand heroic figure and so on, all done extremely, I'm not Prince Hamlet, all done extremely.
Okay, let's just get nostalgic here. It's the end of the year. Let's reminisce about the glory days, right? The glory days of this show was when I was doing shows with Vivian back in 2015. Vivian Veritas, doing shows with Vivian Veritas and her sister back in 2015. Remember those glory days of alt-right Torah talk with Vivian Veritas and Vivian Veritas' sister, and with Melky, Dennis Dale, Ricardo, Richard Spencer would come by, and Kevin McDonald and Mike Enoch. I mean, those were the glory days. And remember the glory days of Melky would be his streams with Vivian. So Vivian just brings the best out in the blokes, right? Every bloke, look, most blokes don't have the thermostat of a Kevin Michael Grace. So Kevin Michael Grace can hold down a show himself. I mean, he reads things beautifully. He's got original ideas pretty much every day. He's a true professional. But people like me, people like Melky, we're not professionals like Kevin Michael Grace, right? So we need our Vivian Veritas. Like we need the Sheila to come along and to inspire us. We need someone to laugh at our jokes and to smile and get us to cheer up a little bit and not take things so seriously. So my best shows were with Vivian Veritas. Melky's best shows were with Vivian Veritas. And look, I'm doing the best I can, but this is a big problem with LA. There are all these hordes of leaf blowers, wielded by Mexicans, and they just make my live streaming life so terribly difficult. So I was just talking to friends, like, what were the best shows that Melky ever did? And they said they were the ones with Vivian. I always enjoyed the chat in Melky's old streams. The Godward stuff is pre-recorded. He's only done one live stream out of the Shabbat members only content. So his content with Vivian was very good. She's dropped off the map since the riots. Vivian is smiling. She's friendly. She laughs. She's a good counter to Melky's seriousness. So Melky, Vivian, and I talking Torah. I mean, this stream has never come close to that peak.
Sympathetically, I think, and Eliot entering onto the inside of that Prufrock's kind of troubled himself. And here is Prufrock, just your ordinary guy. I mean, it's not accidental that Lawrence starts off writing about the working class, and he's praised early on for getting on the inside of what you might call provincial ordinariness. And the bourgeoisie, of course, don't like that. They see that the stage was black with miners, somebody wrote one of Lawrence's plays. Lawrence is regarded as getting on the inside of ordinariness, admittedly abandoning it, but...
Laura, would you like to give an answer?
Yeah, on Prufrock or indeed Pounds Mobley, I mean, they both seem to me about figures who failed.
And when
to be
that
the kind
article
of,
was written, he was systematically, and I know that that's a popular word these days, he was systematically harassed till he killed himself. Do you believe that doxing people is justified if they're Nazis?
I've never doxed someone, and actually, if you look at the article that I'm saying that this is my perspective, and if you look at articles I've written, right, that are about white nationalists in my area, for example, there was like a student in the chemistry department, a fellow graduate student, right? One of the things that I say very explicitly were like, don't expel this person, right? Like, don't ostracize this person. I don't think it's a particularly helpful tactic, right? I think that when we ostracize people.
And the chat says, blonde Vivian is the best Vivian. Bring it all back home. Vivian simp alert. Vivian elevated the stream with her insights and tremendous figure. Writers said they done told that bitch twice.
We drive them further down the path of radicalization, and that can lead to violence, either suicide or murder, right? And so, no, I would not. That's not really my jam. I mean, but like, do you think that there?
So this is the transsexual who got into trouble a few months ago for pretending not to be white, pretending to be an oppressed person of color.
There was a credible reason he would be.
And this is a show from May of 2018 with slightly tipsy Kevin Michael Grace.
Be a threat to the well-being of other people, because if not, then no, I do not think that you should harass and dox someone who is not a credible threat to your life.
Let me ask a different question here. Why are we assuming that suicide is a terribly moral thing, and that we
Yeah, this is Kevin's estranged daughter.
all should applaud people who kill themselves?
Again, not something I said.
I don't think anybody.
No,
said
our
that.
whole
I've never-
society is based on the reification of suicide. That suicides are the bestest
So reification means making physically real.
people in the whole world. Throughout the whole of human history, until about, 50 years ago, suicide was considered to be the gravest of all sins, and now we worship it. Have none of you seen Heathers?
Yeah, I saw that. It was incredibly disturbing. I hated it.
No, what is that? What's Heathers?
The movie Heathers?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with it.
Never seen it.
It's a satire from about 30 years ago about we live in today, where teenagers threatening to kill themselves blackmail the rest of society into doing whatever they order them to do.
Well, can I I normally I'm a big fan of tangents. You guys know that. But can I go back to...
Yes, Kayla, you can do anything you want.
Thank you. Oh, that's actually pretty cool to hear for once. I got to tell you. Okay, well, the reason why I was bringing up Andrew Dodson is what we were talking about suicide, and also I wanted to ask CV if the name Dylan Blyer rings a bell.
Yeah, of course it does.
Well, I don't think the audience is aware of Dylan Blyer. He's just some kid.
Tell us. So the chat says Kevin Michael Grace being drunkenly belligerent to that transsexual was a classic. Glib says KMG is oral wallpaper for the refugee chatters from this show. Chat says there was a flirtatious quality to Melky and Viv. Luke's really scraping the archives tonight. I tried Heather's last weekend. I didn't last 20 minutes. Luke, Eli Computer Guy did a video on Fauci lying to the public and moving the goalposts. 1/3 in says, I have a daddy. We need truth to plan for 2021. We cannot trust scientists now. The chat says, Luke Ford was celibate this entire time. Let that sink in. This is the one and only time Luke Ford contributed to Theatre Thursday. He said, I hated it. I was there when Kevin's liver would call in and beg him to put the bottle down.
Tell us.
Yeah, as I referenced him, a graduate student in the chemistry department who I wrote an article about.
Was Dylan a neo-Nazi?
I couldn't tell you whether or not he was. I can tell you what his rhetoric online suggests, but that's about the extent of it.
Was he an alt-righter?
Again, I can tell you what his rhetoric suggests and what our personal conversations have suggested.
Personally, I wouldn't want to know what his rhetoric...
Kayla, why don't you just tell us what you know about him?
Well, I don't know too much. I know that he was a man that was allegedly had a history of spreading racism online and racist flyers and so forth at his schools. And well, it turns out that CV, she wrote an article about this man, citing his name. And were you citing that there was a possibility he would be a risk, maybe to non-whites or something along those lines? Like, I know. But I mean, the thing is, we know what happens when these articles are written, right? But oh no, he was no threat, or there were no charges against him, because if you're really concerned about someone being a risk, you write an article, you don't report them to the police. You don't wait for them to act. You just simply write an article. You put their name out there. You put their study out there, their field out there, and then you make the allegation that they are a neo-Nazi. So that's why I wanted to ask CV what this man had specifically said, not what his rhetoric implied, not what it suggested, but what it actually said that could lead you to the conclusion that not only he was a Nazi, but justified putting it out there and putting this man's life in danger.
So I would say many things. One is that that's a pretty decent reading of the article, but leaves a couple very important things out. The second thing I would say is that I'm a rhetorician, so I'm going to study people's rhetoric, right? That's what I'm trained to do. And so if your question is, how dare you?
So the transsexual here is CV Vitolo-Haddad, better known as Lexi Transsexual. I'm playing my greatest hits from the glory days of May 2018 when everybody wanted to come on my show. And Art Bell says in the chat, Nick Fuentes' video later on shows Richard Spencer's security team had a skinhead with a crazy armband. Not a great look. Nothing beats the business card with 3 misspellings. A wild brundlefly appears. Trenny got more spots. No, gotta just.
If you study someone's rhetoric, I would suggest that, well, because it's literally the thing I do for a living. So I don't know. That would be the first thing I would say. Second thing I would say is that this article is about literally a spree of actual criminal acts, actual vandalism that this guy went on at his last university. And the reason I wrote the article was because of students in that class who contacted me about these concerns. And they wanted those concerns focalized because they didn't want this person who said things like 1488, gas the kikes, race war now. They didn't really feel comfortable with him teaching them. And I bet you could understand why.
Okay, guys, please clap.
And so, yes, you're right. I did pressure the university to remove him from a teaching position and to instead have him in a research position where he would not be interacting face-to-face with students who, for very obvious reasons, didn't want that. And I don't know, if you can't understand why someone like me would maybe want to keep those students safe as an educator who, again, values that as the primary part of my identity, then I don't know what to tell you.
Has he ever committed any type of physical violence? Has he ever threatened actual physical violence? I mean, I know gas the Skypes, race cars now is it's super edgy, right? Edgelord deluxe. But I mean, has he ever actually said to a non-white or a person of color, "Hey, I'm going to hurt you"? Has he ever said that?
So I think there are several things that do allude to the idea of physical action. And there were also a few stories that are transcript on the bottom from people who make pretty clear the extent of their actions. And I do make that delineation throughout the article several times. It's one of the reasons why I say that he should not be let go from his scholarship or his position at the university, right? Like I lay all of those out as really important considerations. I guess you don't like that I'm approaching it from a different political position, but those are all arguments that I make in the article.
No, you know what? I should commend you for your consideration. That was very considerate of you not to just simply advocate for his firing and his complete removal, but only a minor demotion that would no longer give him access to the job.
It's actually a promotion, not a demotion, and it doesn't stop anyone from getting access. And further, I would say he should have thought about that before he did things like went on a 2-month-long hate crime spree, right? Like you should probably think about those things before you do things like that.
Hey, Luke,
Yes.
can we move back from this edgelord talk?
Sure.
Hold on. Can I jump in real quick? So the first thing I want to say is I find well, first I want to commend CV for coming into the Lion's Den here. She's
wow, this is gentle Ricardo. I mean, I wow, he's changed. This is gentle Ricardo, meek and mild. This is a Christ-like Ricardo.
greatly outnumbered and really carrying herself with a lot of poise. And I think it's great to have a different voice on the program. Second, I find Kevin's incivility rebarbative. I think. I mean, Kevin, you have this nasty habit of like arguing against points people haven't made. 2, like laughing contemptibly while other people are speaking, and just being a real condescending asshole. So
okay, so I will go to the max there and ask why CV has a ring through her nose like an oxen.
You know, I find that when I have a nose piercing, it means that people don't notice the rest of my face. And so they always insult the nose ring first. And that's like a solid self-esteem strategy. I tweeted about it like a year ago. But yeah, that's why I got the piercing. So people don't notice the rest of my face.
No, this idea that a normal person would have a ring through her nose like a beast of burden and then appear in public and say, well, yeah, you're the bad person for noticing this. This is the world we live in now, Luke. This is the world we live in.
I didn't say you were a bad person. Again, things I definitely did not say.
Their noses. Signs and wonders, man.
Signs
Kevin.
and wonders indeed. Signs and wonders.
Kevin,
Yeah,
can
go
you
on.
Kevin, can you give any props to CV? Like, I am impressed by her courage, and I think she's eloquent. And obviously, I'm a right winger, so I don't agree with many of the things. But I'm really impressed with her.
Everyone has been white knighting her tonight except me. So no, I won't.
Okay, that's why I love you, Kevin. That's why I love you, because you continually surprise us, and I appreciate that. So thank you for not white knighting.
I feel like if Kevin didn't already know I was trans, he should be able to tell by how much y'all are sucking my dick tonight.
Come on, you gotta love this girl. I mean, that's amazing. Dennis Dale, you must be stunned, you must be amazed, you must be horrified. Dennis Dale, any thoughts on what's been going down here?
Yeah, I got in the middle of it. I'm sorry, Kevin's a friend of mine, but I don't think you're doing us any favors right now, Kevin. You're not coming off well. I like her manner. I totally disagree. This is important that we understand what we're doing here, guys. These are people, and sometimes people involved in evil movements, as she thinks we're in, even, or not we, maybe someone like me, she thinks of as evil too. But they're real people, and sometimes they're intelligent, and you can't just, I mean, most of what Kevin says is sentiments I agree with, but you can't just slam people, especially when they come off well. You can't look bad and represent me, at least.
Yeah, we're always sucking up to them, and they're never sucking up to us. That sounds perfectly good to me.
No, see, I think, you know, the reason I recommended CV to Luke is because, you know, particularly since Duvid left, we haven't had a good house leftist on the program, and I think she's very smart. I also totally disagree with her, but I think, you know, addressing her arguments is probably a better approach than, mocking laughter.
Well, from what you had said, Brundle, it appears that you were the one who chased Duvid off of the program. Is that correct?
Duvid chased himself off the program because he couldn't handle being blown out by a goy mem.
I see. Just curious. It's unfortunate. I never got to talk to
somebody or something was what it was. Sorry.
Oh.
Dennis Dale, let me just ask you a very tough question, very blunt question, very direct question.
Don't do that.
Dennis, do you regard transsexualism as a mental illness?
I do. Now less so, because I think I see young guys getting in on it as a trend. I wanted to ask CV, is gender dysphoria a mental illness?
I don't personally think so. I think for some people it is like a deep and, the classic story of like a deep, persistent feeling of like your body.
And looking at the chat, Luke is reminiscing over the glory days when you could say the K word without a second thought. Yeah, man, this seems like another century. And half Galicia, they thought CV could replace Duvid. Duvid is a status by himself. The world needs Duvid. And Glib Medley notes the spine does seem to weaken the further west one goes. So people are calling Dennis, sorry, Dale. And David notes it's a West Coast thing to end all monologues with the word sorry. Laponia says, I'm disappointed with Ricardo and Brundle. And Alex says Brundle is very kind and considerate with his use of the correct pronouns. Okay, glory days. Here we go.
Being wrong, right? And that sometimes that can become like obsession is not the right word, right? But like that can become something that encompasses most of your life, right? And if what you need there is surgery to alleviate that incredible sense of hatred towards yourself, right? Then like you should get it. But I think by and large, I don't have like a hate gene that's inherent in me that makes me hate myself, right? So like, in a sense, I don't think of it as entirely something inherent to me, right? So like, no, I wouldn't say it's a mental illness.
But I believe it's classified as such. I'm blanking on the, the medical, the DM, whatever.
So
it still classifies as a mental illness, right? Sorry.
So the DSMV has gone through, it's on number 5 right now, and it's gone through a series of iterations. So first it was gender identity disorder, and this was, I believe, in the 3rd edition. And gender identity disorder was basically someone who believes that they should be living as the opposite sex, right? Like it was very much phrased in, I think what Kevin would kind of agree is like, it's like this delusion that people have. And then more recent ones have kind of said it's about a persistent internal feeling, again, sort of locating it within the individual and within the person's mind or body being separate from each other. I personally don't think of it that way, but
can I just ask you
live your life.
Because well, do you accept it? Because I think you see where I'm going. There's a problem now that we have various genders. And if we're going to classify someone going through sex change surgery as being mentally ill, right? Shouldn't we be debating that treatment, that radical treatment, like changing their sex? I mean, isn't there a problem on your side of things as an advocate?
I mean,
you know what I mean? If it's classified as mental illness, then that's entirely consistent with where your movement is right now. Oh, Kevin.
Yeah, I mean, one of the hard.
Dennis, if I decided to move to the Caribbean and said I was a pirate and went arr, arr, arr all the time and put a parrot on my shoulder,
we all know about that.
Would you say there was something fucking wrong with me? Are you kidding?
No, I'm challenging. I think CV knows what I'm just challenging her sides. Right now, I think it's entirely inconsistent with the trans movement to be calling transsexualism a mental illness. Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah, I think, and there's tension, because there are people, I would say there are a couple different categories of lines of thought about this. So there's trans people who think that it is biological, it is medically necessary, and no one should deviate from that, right? Like you have to have this medical condition to be transgender. And I think part of that is driven by the belief that if we don't think of this as a mental illness, then no one's going to give us insurance coverage, and then we'll have these surgeries that we deeply need for reasons that are biological and we can't access.
My point is that it's inconsistent with.
So I'm playing my archives from May 2018 and doubling my viewership by playing content from 2.5 years ago. Glib Medley notes Upspeak originated on the West Coast. It was initially known as Valley Girl. So I remember the Valley Girl movie came out in 1984. I remember a lot of discussion when I was in high school in 1980 to 84. A lot of talk about Valley Girl talk. Upspeak sounds apologetic. It's like constantly asking for affirmation from the listener. Vocal fry started about 20 years ago. Again, on the West Coast, urban professional women throughout the U.S. adapted it, thinking it made them sound tougher. Vivian's got quite a bit of vocal fry.
But your argument would be, I assume, that transgenderism is normal and it's okay and we should all be tolerant of it. At the same time,
I don't know. I wouldn't say like normal or okay, right?
Well,
like I don't think it's a
anymore.
value position, right? I don't think of it as a value position. I think that I have like a little article on this that I wrote a couple summers ago that if you would like to see, you can. It's illustrated and has pretty pictures. But like, it's really just a way for people to try to do their best to explain themselves to you with a very limited set of language around kind of like how gender shapes our expected roles in society, right? And again, there's a conversation over whether or not those are good, but it's just someone trying to explain to you how they feel.
Yeah. But you guys were talking about heteronormativity, this word. And I realize, CV, now I think you guys put us all in the position of we can't have normal anymore. That's what it really is. Heteronormative just means
normal.
It means the normal accepted.
Normal is a man with a ring through her nose pretending to be a woman. That's what normal is, Dennis. Get with the program.
Dude, I live in Portland. Sadly, I've acceded to tattoos and piercings of all kinds. I don't like them.
I gotta just jump in. Portland, I didn't know that. There's a series of Oriental tunnels underneath Portland.
Yeah,
sorry to interrupt.
Check that out.
Yeah.
Portland is a gorgeous city if you live up in the hills and not in the flats.
Kevin, like you laugh at transsexualism, but late at night having
I laugh at it because I laugh at it to ward off evil. Seriously, Luke, because it is the devil. All right.
But late at night, you've never found yourself Googling for chicks with dicks?
What, are you fucking kidding me? Seriously, man. You are making me angry now, okay?
I'm sorry.
Oh, don't get angry, Kevin. We don't want to see that.
Don't get him angry, Luke. He'll cackle at you.
Can I ask a question? Because I know we're talking about whether this is a mental disorder or not. If any mammal it wants to participate in something that no longer allows it to reproduce, is that a mental illness? Is that mammal sick? Right?
No, mammals do not have mental illnesses because
that's why I changed it.
Only humans can have mental illness. Come on, try harder.
from mental illness.
As a biologist, I'd like to point out that humans are mammals, just for the record.
Right.
Yeah, the most important point is that, right, they can't reproduce. It's almost irrelevant whether or not you want to classify it as a mental illness or not, if one is talking about reproductive capacity. And of course, that is something that I think whatever society one is having such a discussion in should take and put a premium on, because you can't have a society,
absolutely. We should be spending enormous amount of resources looking into homosexual reproductive capacity, because how is it
that's not exactly
that homosexuals cannot reproduce sexually? Does this not seem to you the most outrageous thing in the world? I mean, come on. I think the government should get involved. I think the government should spend billions, if not trillions, on this. And if it doesn't work, we should simply try harder.
Can I ask a question to Kevin?
Yes.
Go ahead.
In all honesty, because I feel that's an interesting line of thought where, trans people in theory, although this isn't really true, are not, reproductive or maybe not reproducing.
You're not reproductive because it takes a man and a woman.
You don't know the genitals of my partner. But anyway, the point being, would you rather I
don't want to know the
reproduce?
genitals of your partner. Please, back off.
But would you rather I reproduce? Like, you're upset that people like me aren't reproductive.
No, I don't
would you rather me have
reproduce.
a bunch? Okay, so then maybe don't use that as your argument. So
reproduce.
Right, so it's probably not important whether or not I can, right? Because you would prefer I not. So maybe let me have that one.
Please don't.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so taking individuals specifically out of this, my point was just that there should be a really high premium on reproduction and ensuring the succession of one's line. Now, maybe there's particular individuals which one doesn't want to reproduce. Like, I don't think we should have sociopaths that are Ted Bundy type individuals reproducing. But short of that, it seems to me that just almost all of and you see this in the academic papers that come out of these attempts to justify the disclosure of the future, like Lee Edelman, guys like that, because
you have to be more specific.
Lee Edelman is he's a critical theorist and homosexual guy, and he thinks that
more specific.
Well, specific about what?
Everything.
Okay.
You're not explaining yourself very well.
Do you want me to bail you out on the explanatory part here?
No,
yeah, CV, come
fine.
on, help
You're about to get translated.
No, just a moment. I'm trying to finish. So his theory revolves around this idea that the only way you can destroy capitalism is by making a population collapse, by having people not breed, and by mainlining or rather they would call it queering society at large.
You understand that's happening already. When the United States we're down to 1.77 reproduction, right?
Yes,
so
this is my point.
Your pal has won already.
He's not my pal. I'm saying that's a problem.
So I was inspired to look up this video because Quantrell Bishop put up a few minutes of this discussion on his Twitter account. So, it's Luke plagiarizing my archival work. It's a vulgar display of power. This show's from May of 2018. It's the second or third show I ever did with Kevin Michael Grace. Student says, all of this could be done again on D Live, monetized. Everyone is still around. You could all meet up once a week without being best friends. Said Kevin Michael Grace reads the news alone. Dennis Dale watches Black Lives Matter alone. Halsey sells sex dolls alone. Come on, guys, cut out the malarkey. And then the chat says that derisive laughter is an Irish thing. And I missed that evil Kevin laugh. Pat Buchanan does it sober. Are you effing kidding me? Humans have always had a contingent of sterile drones. Luke knows which buttons to press. Luke is a master disturber. Luke was a master disturber. Luke lived for the juiciness. Wonder how Alex DeLarge would feel about CV. Luke, retire the sunrise video. Your gimbal video will be 100 times better for your brand to park in the free section. Come on, how many times has Kevin ended up dancing around naked, laughing diabolically with nipple clamps on in the old days? Come on, disavow. Kevin's always been a serious intellectual.
That's a joke, my friend.
Kelter, did you mean to ask CV that question, though? Sorry to interrupt.
CV, why don't you jump in here? You were going to help out Cater. Like, I know the guy had this incredible imperative need to finish, but I say forget about his need to finish. Why don't you begin, CV? Why don't you help
Now that's feminism.
out?
Yeah, I can do that. So, I mean, and it's not really helping. I mean, he explained it perfectly fine. I feel terrible. That was mean for no reason. I'm sorry.
No, he deserved it.
Yeah, I
if
mean,
not in this life, another life.
I mean, yeah, Edelman was a kind of an older school queer theorist. He's kind of, I mean, fallen out of favor is not the right word, but people have kind of moved past his theory. But the parts of it that are still relevant is that we focus a lot on, right, like children. Children are the future. And so we put all of this premium on the innocence of children. And as a result, the families that those children.
All right, Luke.
Yes, Kevin.
I got to ask you a question here.
Yes, Kevin.
When you invited me to be on your show, you didn't tell me we were going to be talking about queer theorism and the children of the future. I feel very upset now. Do you understand?
Yeah,
Yes, I was told I was going to be talking about the ADL. So he tricked me.
I was told we were going to be talking about the ADL.
Kevin,
exactly.
haven't you seen enough of this show to know that like the original topic lasts about 15, 20 minutes? That's all you can count on it for.
You know.
Come on, Kevin.
He tricked us.
This is unscripted, man. This is
Luke, I sense Talmudic trickery on your part.
This is very, very Talmudic.
I don't have no complaints over here. Thank you.
I think this is excellent content.
Fucking great,
Kevin. I wish you were just more of a team player.
Just God, reclaim your joy, Kevin. Fuck, dude.
What? Repeat that again.
Reclaim your joy. We are in a grim fight. Yes, everything you say is true. Really, why would you whine about it? Be happy.
Hey, Dennis,
fight with a fucking.
You really have become one with Portland, haven't you?
I was in Seattle for like 15 years. It's
and that softened you up for Portland, didn't it?
Not really, man. I kind of become pretty fascist, frankly.
Yeah, I give you the straight line, Dennis, and you don't take it. You know, there's no teaching you. Okay.
No, there's one Dennis.
Are you a fascist, Dennis?
No, but I lean that way. I mean, I used to talk to Kevin when I still had, like remnants of like, civic nationalism or,
Are you kind of like a live and let live guy, or do you think?
Oh, we don't want to talk about me. Yeah,
no,
personally.
No. I mean, I'm just.
Oh no, not. Yeah, no. I become right wing. I was just telling Kevin, not fascist. Not really overstating it to Kevin just to mess with him, but yeah.
Well, I have no
problem calling myself a white nationalist.
It's like about 2005. Okay, so like. Nothing that he would say would be a surprise to me, okay? This whole idea that, like I'm outing myself to Luke Ford here, well, I know it already, okay?
Okay, I want to answer Kevin's question. So, yeah, I had no idea about the full panel. I had no idea that CV was coming on tonight. I've scheduled her for a one-on-one interview at 3 p.m. tomorrow, California time. And it just
for the record, I definitely didn't plan this. This was like what we met 4 hours ago, maybe.
Yeah. We just exchanged Twitter messages 4 hours ago.
Then why are the
planning-
rest of us here, Luke?
You're invited. No one's forcing you. I want
No,
you
no
here,
one's
Kevin.
forcing me, but I feel sorry for this woman now. Now that she's being ganged up on all these people, and apparently, it was supposed to be a one-on-one.
No. I'm going to do the one-on-one with her tomorrow.
Kevin, who's white knighting now?
Touche.
There we go.
Touche.
There we go.
You
I
did
prefer
fine.
none
I
of
was
you
gonna
white
say.
knight ever. I think if you white knight, it has to be for a woman.
I'm gonna have to keep my eye on you. You are very sharp.
Oh, thank you. Don't cut yourself on that edge.
I first encountered CV on Halsey's show. So where did you find this treasure, Halsey?
She joined one of my friend's discords, and she can hold her own in a debate. So I got her up against one of my writers who's an anarcho-capitalist, and they kind of debated communism versus capitalism. It was a lot of fun.
And did she trigger him?
Oh my God. He started screaming. Like, I mean, to the point where he was like turning red in the face. Like,
and Kevin, would you allow a transsexual person in your home?
No.
What if you'd hired, your computer broke down, like you hired someone to come fix your computer, you had no idea, and then they show up?
No.
Luke, you know that computers are binary and trans people aren't. So the likelihood of those two worlds colliding are very, very small.
Okay,
wow.
Kevin.
Wow, we've got an Oscar Wilde here. Go on.
Yeah, I mean, she's sharp. And so, Kevin, what should society's attitudes and laws be vis-a-vis the transgendered? And what about on an individual basis? How should
what our law should be is to run down every doctor, every physician, everyone involved in the drug dealing community, and to destroy them through lawsuits if necessary, and through criminal punishments if that does not suffice.
So, like, I for traditionalists, it seems
I don't think I've made it clear to you how much I hate these fucking people. Is it clear now?
Kevin, what are you sipping on tonight?
Seriously, second triggering of CV's career.
Yeah, Kevin, what do you got there? A highball? What do you got?
Oh, I see. Well, what are you getting at? What's your point?
I'm just wondering.
You don't have to answer that question.
I'm just wondering, Kevin. I'm just wondering how I can get to your state of mind. I like it.
He's Irish,
What?
right? You're Irish, aren't you, Kevin, in your ancestry? And this is how the Irish
Yes,
are.
I am. Just like you, Luke Ford. Hey, why don't you talk about Ford being an Irish name? Why don't you go on about that, huh?
I have a
You think him
famous.
of being Irish? Because it sounds like you're pretty pissed about it.
No, I
No.
do have Irish ancestry.
Ford is an Irish name.
I have
The Ford family, Henry Ford, you know, the Fairline, the Ford Fairline, that's the village in Ireland where the Fords came from. You know that, Luke?
I did not, but I do. I have a famous Irish ancestor. His name's Michael Dyer. He escaped like 3 times from British prisons, and then he was eventually transported to Australia, where he was quite a handful. But he was a United Irishman leader in the 1798 rebellion. He fought a guerrilla campaign against the British Army. He was, I believe, he was imprisoned 3 times, escaped 3 times, eventually transported to Australia. So that's my ancestor, Michael Dwyer, Dwyer.
So that's why they call you, Luke, the man they couldn't hang.
Yes.
Well played.
Kevin, what about vis-a-vis homosexuality? Do you think it should be illegal? Do you think it should be strongly sanctioned? And how should individuals relate to homosexuals?
Are we talking to me now?
Yeah, Kevin. Yes, you.
I used to be a liberal, and I used to think that, nah, these people suffer enough already. Now I'm thinking maybe they haven't, because homosexuals are looking at a life where they suffer.
And looking at the chat says Dennis Dale is so serious, it's funny. And as for Dennis talking about being a fascist, Laponius notes, fascists don't say sorry every 5 seconds.
Well, damnation and degradation.
Yeah, so both Luke and Halsey have substantial Irish ancestry. And Nitrogen says, is Luke really Irish? His finger lingering over the unsubscribe button.
In this world and damnation in the next. And the question is, how much are we going to allow them to infect everyone else? And as I say, I used to be liberal about the matter, but now I'm not so liberal. Especially since you remember the joke, they want our children. Now they've got our children through sex ed. Now they've got our children through sex ed. So all the jokes about them, ha, 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 turns out to be true.
Yeah, I used to think that what people did in the privacy of their own homes was their business alone. Now I realize everything we do, even in the most private moments, it has rippling effects. And so I don't think a healthy society can afford to be, laissez-faire about what people do in the privacy of their own bedrooms.
Well, I know.
Are you saying
you know that you think, Luke, that God is watching us at all times,
yes.
Right?
Yes.
Well, exactly. That's what it comes down to. The people who believe that God is watching us versus the people who believe that God is not watching us.
Yeah, I don't believe that, and I agree with your position, Kevin.
Do you think you're a freak, Cater?
What kind of question?
In that regard.
I think I'm uncommon in that regard.
Okay. CV, you've heard a lot of tough talk. Do you have any thoughts on the wide variety of things discussed in the last 15, 20 minutes?
Yeah, I mean, the one that most readily comes to mind is the conversation on kind of what happens in the most intimate spaces, that those have a spillover effect. Yeah, totally agree, right? The personal is political, all of those things. Nancy Fraser writes an article that's a response to like it doesn't matter who the fuck these dead scholars are, right? Like, doesn't matter. But point being, scholars have criticized the separation between the public and private for exactly that reason, right? What gets relegated to the private sphere is a political decision, and it's one that definitely has an impact on how our households form, what kind of values they carry forward, what gets left behind. Yeah, all of that is true. I just have a different perspective on the rest of it.
CV, I invited pretty much everyone to this chat tonight to talk about the ADL. And do you have any thoughts, CV, on the Anti-Defamation League?
Honestly, I don't know a ton about them. I mean, I consider them sort of like they write for the public, right? So like, I don't really do my fact checking on websites that are public facing and not other scholars. There's like a weird, that academy is like a black box of everyone citing each other and just a giant masturbatory citation fest. So like, I don't really know enough to have thoughts.
Well, the ADL essentially decides what we can and cannot say on social media. So you may not have thoughts on the ADL, but the ADL certainly has thoughts about you. So how do you feel about a Jewish ethnic activist group essentially controls what can be said on social media? CV.
I don't think that any group should have disproportionate control over anything, especially things that don't directly impact their lives. So I've heard pretty persuasively from Halsey that is just not an accurate way to portray that situation, right? And to portray control over the media. And I've heard lots of things about the demographics of New York. I'm compelled by those things.
Halsey, how do you view the Anti-Defamation League?
Enemies.
And why do you say that?
Because they take what is supposed to be a noble cause, which is stopping hate, and they turn it into a witch hunt for anybody right of Bernie Sanders. There's no value to society to going around taking your opinion and using it to silence others.
Agree with Halsey 100%.
Yeah. Halsey, about a year or two ago, some leftists tweeted, "All I want for Christmas is white genocide."
So it was
And
George Ciccarello, I think.
yeah. So then there was this immediate move by many alt-right activists and other people on the right to get this guy fired and to ruin his life. Do you think that was the appropriate reaction to his speech?
No, not at all. I'm completely against people that went to have him fired and brought up on disciplinary action and all that. What I would have liked is someone to go beat him to death with a baseball bat. That would have been probably a lot more fitting of the crime, I think.
And I think I have to say I disavow here
Wow,
to make sure my channel doesn't get
Disavow.
showed and we don't support any criminal violence. Cater, what do you think about
I apologize, Luke. I wasn't saying that right now.
I know
Someone should do it.
Yeah, no, I know you're meaning it spiritually, not physically.
Of course.
It's an inner struggle. It's an inner struggle.
Yeah, in the struggle. Cater, what do you think was the appropriate reaction to that guy who said all he wants for Christmas is white genocide? Was the appropriate reaction to get this guy fired and his life ruined?
First thing you should have done, anybody makes some kind of ridiculous statement like that, is ask, are you being serious? Right? I think that's the very first thing you should do, as opposed to just assuming that they're being serious and firing them. If he was serious, I really don't care. You're a really awful person, and I really have very little concern for you if you're actively advocating for mass murder. If he wasn't, then no, clearly not.
Didn't he put out another tweet or something in some way almost confirming his prior statement?
Yes.
Oh, he had a history of that. He was a rather bizarre individual.
He followed it up with with not only no apologies, but he doubled down on it a couple times.
There we go. That's what I was thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was like a weird, it walked it back and tried to explain the context, but the context wasn't there for the initial tweet. And you can't, tweets are just such a bad medium for edgy, antagonistic, dumb things with no purpose. Oh God.
What he said was an edgy, antagonistic, dumb, those are words that describe bants. He wasn't doing bants. He literally thinks white people should be destroyed. And there should be.
Well, no, I mean, he is white. The way that he said it was, he's like, I was mocking the idea that there is white genocide going on. So I don't think that's a correct characterization of his perspective. But I also have been.
How would you know that?
Critical
How
of him.
would you know that?
Because I think
you're telling me you are a man who became a woman, and you were telling me that a white man could not really hate himself enough to become something else. Look
I'm not saying that.
Mirror. Look in the mirror.
Yeah, so that's not what I'm saying. And it's not about whether or not someone hates themselves. I think people can hate themselves enough to do just about anything. I think what I'm saying is the explanation that he released said that was his intent with the tweet. And like I said, I don't think I've already criticized the tweet. I don't need to go there again, right? I don't think it was a smart thing to tweet, but I don't think that it's correct to say he doubled down on being yes, I actually really want this, because that's not, to me, how he explained it.
Kevin, wait,
Yes?
let me ask you a question. Kevin, is there any punishment too severe for the man who tweeted that?
Remind me exactly what it was he tweeted.
He said, all I want for Christmas is white genocide.
And he's a white person?
Yes.
Well, you know what happened at the end of the Second World War in places like Norway to the Quislings? You're familiar with this phrase?
Yeah, they got their heads shaved and they got beaten up and they got discriminated against.
Hey, you know this group ABBA?
Yeah, I love ABBA.
Yeah, all good people love ABBA. I'm glad to hear it, Luke.
Thank you.
You know the dark-haired one, Anna Frid?
Yeah.
You know she's not Swedish?
Really?
You know her story?
No.
She's Norwegian. Except that she got she's the daughter of a German soldier during the Second World War. And after the Second World War, when it turned out that the Germans lost, they got effectively kicked out of Norway and went to Sweden. That's what they used to do. That's what they used to do to traitors in the old day, okay? They made them leave their own countries.
So
would you say
Shikharilla
that's
should be exiled to the island
their
of
heads too.
No, maybe we should just exile them all to Canada, except the difficulty would be they're all the same there anyway now already.
But Kevin, so you would shed no tears, basically, whatever happened to this guy, because the things that he's tweeted are just so abhorrent that he deserves
so
whatever he
abhorrent.
gets.
I don't know. See, the problem with the society that we live in now is these people make these kind of statements that one would associate with romantic heroes several centuries ago, but they don't mean anything by it because they don't understand what it means. You see what I'm trying to get at here?
Well, what it means, they're all often power.
No, it's all, you know, when some white guy says, oh, yes, I stand against the power and fuck the power and all that. Oh, and I'm looking for the power to come down upon me. They have no idea, first of all, what power even means.
Well, yeah, that's my point.
Where they stand in the society that they live. They're fucking idiots. You see what I'm getting at?
Yeah, I agree. That lady, was it Madonna, Shikana, one of the pop stars, when she said she wanted to blow up the White House, like, and people were, the conservatives ran with that, and they're like, oh my gosh, she's a dangerous terrorist. Now, clearly she's not. She's not going to blow up anything. But people say those kind of things all the time. So unless there's a credible reason why you think that they're going to do what they're saying they're going to do, even if they say they're serious, it doesn't matter.
I mean, I think it's a little silly to assume that he can actually commit white genocide.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, maybe.
No, I just think I think he should be shamed. All right.
Oh, he was.
You know, these people talk about white privilege, and again, they never look at it in the Nietzschean way, which is that why is anyone listening to you if you are not a beneficiary yourself of white privilege? You know, let's turn.
So, by the way, this cat that Dennis Dale is stroking, a few months later, it would wander away into the bush and die. So you're essentially seeing some of the last moments on video captured of this cat before his very sad demise.
Turn the skepticism on the skeptics.
It's a byproduct of ressentiment.
I'm sorry, what does that mean in English?
It was just a phrase that Nietzsche used to encapsulate various different attitudes of people who resented their masters. It was sort of like the encapsulation of his idea of the slave morality, where the slaves always had to come up with some reason why they were being oppressed that didn't have to do with their own inferiority. But of course, that's generally in Nietzsche's view, the reason why one is a slave. It's because you're inferior, and you just won't admit it.
Kevin, what do you think of Jesus's attitude, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do?
That's rather specific, isn't it, Luke?
I'm directing the question at you.
No, I'm looking at the particular circumstances of Jesus' crucifixion.
Okay, so you're saying it was specific to time and place. It's not like an
No,
attitude.
I'm not saying that. I'm asking if that's how you look at it.
No, I'm asking you, obviously.
I mean, this is the most dangerous question in the world. Here's some biblical quote. What do you think of it?
That's a dangerous question?
What?
Yeah, actually it is.
Okay, but you love dangerous questions, Kevin.
Okay, Luke, I'll tell you this. For the longest time, well, I was a liberal. For the longest time, I will confess, as shameful as it is, that I was a libertarian, okay? Then I wised up. For the longest time, I thought that the bad things that the rulers of my country were doing, and the rulers of the United States, the rulers of England, were because of stupidity. And then I thought, no, I'm not buying this anymore. They're wicked. All right? They're simply wicked, because there's a limit to the number of times, oh no, we never thought that that dumb thing would happen, when the exact dumb thing happens again and again.
And the chat wants to know if Brundlefly has social media accounts. Well, not only does this poor cat die just shortly after this live stream, but Brundlefly met his sad demise about 2 years or about 18 months after this live stream. He accidentally self-asphyxiated while trying to reach a private peak. He was like chasing the dragon right off the mountaintop, and he accidentally self-asphyxiated, so Brundlefly is no more.
Our enemies are wicked, okay? That's my answer to your question, Luke.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Anyone?
In other words, Kevin used to drink light beer, and then he wised up and he switched to hard liquor.
No, I know. I drink the 8% beer now, actually.
Cater, what do you think of the attitude, forgive them, they don't know what they do? Do you think that's a useful attitude to have?
It can be, contextually.
No,
Yeah,
forget the specifics. No, I'm saying as a general attitude in life. For example, I have that attitude. I have the attitude.
I don't think you can take it as a general attitude, especially in the information age. So if I wouldn't take it as a general attitude, and I do not, and I wouldn't recommend it to people as a general attitude. But in specific instances where you have somebody who's, mentally deficient, for instance, like a lot of the spree shooters, there's something wrong with their brain. They're not all there very clearly. I don't know if you should forgive them or not, but it's more reasonable to do so when you know that somebody is just insane or mentally deranged than somebody who's in full possession of their faculties.
Hey, Luke, I want to ask you a question.
Yes, sir.
You wrote about the porn industry for many years.
Yes.
And you say this, forgive them for they do not know what they do. Isn't that maybe you talking about those people? Because you have said, and I've written you on this subject, that these people are very dumb.
Yes. Yes. But I'm coming at it from also just a evolutionary biological perspective that free will is a leap of faith. And that if you choose not to take the leap of faith, then everything that people do is simply a product of genes and environment.
Free will is just a what?
Free will is a leap of faith. If you
free will is the basis of our society, because if it didn't exist, let's put it this way. It's been put to me by evil people that even if free will didn't exist, we'd have to pretend it exists, because otherwise no one could be morally assumed to do anything.
Yes. Yes, I agree that the basis of our society, the basis of Western civilization, is a leap of faith that people have free will.
So why can't free will simply be a product of the emergent processes of the brain?
But wait, emergent processes of the brain, that's just simply biological and chemical interactions with a particular environment. There's no free will there. That's still mechanical.
Well, hey, you know what Tom Wolfe wrote in one of his later essays? I'm sorry, but your soul just died, about IQ.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with this, Luke?
I've read it. I don't recall.
No, this idea that we could have very simple IQ tests by planting electrodes into the brain, and then we wouldn't have to worry about cultural questions, right?
Yeah.
And he wrote that it was this point that no, this is going to be shut down entirely, because we cannot deal with what the results would be. And the results would be just pretty much what the old tests came up with, right?
Yeah.
Once again, I'll tell you what I told you, I think the first time that we talked, that I don't think that high intelligence is a moral attribute,
Yeah, I would agree, and I would just add to conclude that topic, unless somebody else wanted to comment, that I don't think there are clearly things that our brains just don't have the capacity inherently to do, and that we have to use machines to observe. And I think the precise, well, you wouldn't like the term mechanics, but the precise mechanics of consciousness, or in some ways how it operates, I don't think we can just get to the bedrock of that from rationalizing and attempting to interpolate.
Consciousness? Sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt. I promise, this is the last time I'll interrupt today. We talk about consciousness. You talk about consciousness. This can only be a metaphor because it cannot be proved to exist.
Well, I mean, one experiences the experience of consciousness is true. Whether or not consciousness exists then goes into the realm of metaphysical questioning.
Measure it. Prove
I'm not
that it
making
exists. You
sense.
can't.
No.
Okay, let's cut over, see what's going on with JF Gariepy on Millenniyule.
On these nights of Christmas.
Excellent. So you become a sort of a chef at Christmas time?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've always been a chef back in the days when I was
your own history on YouTube would be to talk about 2020. And this is what I've talked about with other guests on Millennial, as you would expect. There has been BLM, there has been COVID, and there has been the US election. And there also has been the rise of Bitcoin. And I've been told that you're a Bitcoin extremist, a real fan, a connoisseur.
Absolutely. I've become independent due to Bitcoin, and I keep being independent from the world due to Bitcoin, and it's so wonderful. And I'm a Bitcoin.
Okay, so press 1 if you believe JF Gariepy that he's become independent due to Bitcoin, because I recall JF talking quite a lot about how he's not going to be able to survive if he goes on DLive. So he's talked a lot in 2020 about how his current mode of making a living was not going to survive. Now he's claiming that he's independent due to Bitcoin. Other times he's talked about how he can pay his expenses from his book. I doubt that his book can fund his living expenses. So do you think he's telling the truth here?
Maximalist, so I actually hate other cryptocurrencies.
All right. Well, on that note, actually, I should say that people can support, and I didn't just bring this in for the sake of it, but I genuinely was curious about JS' position on the crypto issue. But now that it's brought up, here are the ways that you can support me with crypto, should you so desire. Now, if you hold on a second, I'll just paste these links in, and there we go. That'd be very much appreciated. Now, also, I will share that link to the video. So, okay, would you like to talk about Bitcoin briefly, or should we go into the politics?
Absolutely, we can talk about it. I mean, how amazing is it that, 9-10 years ago, some guy has an ID, a decentralized network that can do 3 ridiculous functions: send, receive, and hold. And to a space that is a totally virtual space, little blocks, 21 million blocks that mean nothing, but that mean everything because it means nothing. This is so beautiful and it's so liberating. I'm amazed that 2020 was the year in the end where the institutional investors came in. At this point, we have people who own billions of dollars in Bitcoin, and it's not even people, it's corporations at this point. And one of the great innovators in this is Michael Saylor, who had already bought all of the Bitcoins he could buy with all of the cash that MicroStrategy had available. He wanted to buy more, so what does he do? He emits notes, promises from his company, giving interest rates to the people who buy it. And what does he do with this $600 million? He buys more Bitcoin. So at this point, we have Michael Saylor, more than $1 billion of Bitcoins in his possession. We have, of course, Binance, the CEO of Binance. Who knows how much they have? Probably multiple billions. It's so amazing, and it's a decentralized system that will be tested in the next 10 years through legislation, through attacks of all kinds, through judiciary decisions. But it is so early in this process, it's still not a problem. Legislation has still not become a problem for Bitcoin, and it will not in the short term. So there are still big investment opportunities. And what an halvening! We are now at an all-time high. Every time Bitcoin rises $1,000, it's the highest it's ever been. And Richard Spencer said 2 weeks ago, he said 2 weeks ago, sell all your Bitcoins. He said, sell all your Bitcoins at 20K because it's going to fall again. What a crazy man.
Well, he is known for coming out with rather strange ideas sometimes. Yeah. So, but let's not go into that. So you would say that Bitcoin is something that people should get into, I'm guessing.
Absolutely. I mean, I said that you should get into Bitcoin 8 months ago, approximately, when it was at 7,000. That's why I said to all my audience, now is the time to invest Bitcoin. If they listen to me, they have multiplied by 4 their entire wealth. So, of course, if you're late and you didn't hear my counsel then, it's still not too late. It's going to rise still by 4x minimum. And so there's still big potential in the upper direction. But it's too bad that you couldn't join at 7,000 because I did counsel very clearly to do it.
Yeah, but it's still not too late. And that's the key thing here is it doesn't matter that you went in at the start. You can get in now and you will still make gains. I saw a headline yesterday, Bitcoin price to grow 10 times by the end of 2022, as JP Morgan estimates value of $650,000 per Bitcoin by the end of 2022. $650,000.
Absolutely. The early predictions based on stock to flow was bringing the value at 100,000 or 180,000. Then there are some institutional investors who have looked at the situation and they've looked at all of the serious big names in financial holdings are now throwing their money into Bitcoin. And so you'd think whatever the picture we had 3 months ago is so much more positive. And in fact, 3 months ago, I was not thinking we would be at 27K before we even enter 2021. I was aiming for a peak around December 2021. I thought that the bull run would start somewhere in the spring or the summer. But what's happening is, let's not forget what determines the Bitcoin economy. It is big holders like Binance who have already all of the Bitcoins. Really, all they're waiting for is to create the bull run, to make it happen and see it happen in front of them. So you have exchanges that are actually incentivized in having this bull run
fairly future proof. But it's also something that people should get into for their own reasons, as we've just described. So I think it's I think it's just something that I want to keep sort of pushing towards people, because this is very serious for you and me, but it's also something that other people can definitely benefit from. So
ultimately people like us, will inevitably be cancelled, and we will have our bank accounts deleted at times and other paths to us deleted. And so but the reason we need Bitcoin is ultimately the reason why everyone needs Bitcoin. It's because as soon as you have some sort of wealth, they're going to come for you. The government's going to come for you. Even your girlfriend's going to come for you. And Bitcoin takes this wealth and puts it in a virtual space where it can jump and freely move and change wallets, and it's beautiful.
All right. Some people, and I agree with you, I think it's a very exciting thing to get into. Some people are asking to follow up on last year's Millennial when you appeared, and you were very noir-pilled, to coin a phrase, so intensely, and I wasn't sure whether you were trolling, and I was trying to sort of help you and so on. How do you see that hangout now, that stream, and how do you feel now in comparison to a year ago?
Well, I feel that I was absolutely right. What about you? I mean, because you were the one telling me, Jeff, I didn't know you were that black-pilled, and you were trying to push a little bit of white pill on me. But have I not been absolutely correct in what I've said in 2019, which was we are headed toward the absolute crushing of the right, where the right will realize that even their supposed success...
No. We've got Rumble, we've got BitChute, we've got the growth of video alternatives to YouTube. So... no, I don't believe that we are witnessing the absolute crushing of the right. I don't believe that we've seen a reduction in opportunities for live streaming. Yeah, on YouTube it's become more censorious, but DLive is almost censorship-free. BitChute is almost censorship-free. Rumble censors only very lightly.
Since 2016 were all illusory, and we're going to be crunched and crushed by the machine. And Trump will be crushed too. Was I not right?
Yes, I'm afraid you were. In the context of 2020, for sure.
Trump wasn't crushed by the machine. Trump was never popular. Trump would have lost in 2016 to Joe Biden. Joe Biden was always about 2 percentage points more popular than Hillary Clinton.
This has been a dreadful, dreadful year. But I don't think I was dreadfully optimistic about 2020. I was thinking, in the long term, there's more hope. But yeah, I can definitely agree with you. I would never attempt to deny that 2020 has been an awful year.
Absolutely.
It's been an awful year for whom? It's been a great year for me. I've read a lot of books. So healthy people, they've simply substituted all sorts of activities that they've been putting off. And now when one activity they can no longer participate in, they do something different. They read more books. They write more poetry. They paint more pictures.
I mean, we've seen essentially, the control of the means of production, which may be like a utopian, bizarre idea for people that some far leftists hold in some extreme universities, but we've seen them deploy the control of the means of production in ways that I didn't even suspect. Taking this whole pandemic and just shutting down everything. That was a beautiful performance showing just how...
Okay, we didn't shut down everything. We shut down in certain locales to varying degrees, certain sectors of the economy, but people who are earning over $60 an hour, they didn't lose any work. Also, it appears that the United States economy might not even have negative GDP growth in 2020. So some parts of the economy got shut down, other parts of the economy got restricted, other parts of the economy were positively affected.
How strong the left is, that if they decide to crash the entire country, they can, and they can within 24 hours.
Okay, it wasn't the left. There are all sorts of regimes of the right and the left. They're all struggling to deal with a virus, a challenge from COVID-19, respiratory virus that the world really hasn't seen for 50 to 100 years. So it has nothing to do with the left.
Hours.
Some people are disagreeing with you, very angry.
For example, in Australia, you had a coalition of the government on the right, on the left. They all basically agreed not to make COVID a political issue. And so they essentially agreed in the federal government level of Australia to make the reaction to COVID-19 a bipartisan matter.
They're saying, you also said that Bernie would be our next president.
Well, yeah, I mean, because I thought that Bernie was the quickest channel for this leftist control. But what you end up finding is that actually there are people worse than Bernie who were actually already in power and who have destroyed the economy more than Bernie would have. And so when I saw 2020 deploy in front of me, I was like, okay, it's not through Bernie as I thought, but it's worse than I thought. In many ways, the economy of 2020, even under a Trump leader.
Again, it has nothing to do with left or right. So left and right governments, Israel has had at least 3 sharp lockdowns, shutdowns, and Israel has a center-right government, so it has nothing to do with left versus right. That they've all had to deal with this unprecedented for nearly a century threat of a COVID.
Which is amazing that they succeeded at putting this under a Republican president, is worse than communism. In communism, at least you can still go to the shop, you can still go.
Okay, so really, this is worse than communism. Just shows that JF doesn't know what life under communism was like. I'm sure people who are living under communism would have welcomed the restrictions to still live in the West in 2020.
Try to get some food if you wait in line. Here we have just a reduction to everything that they define as essential, as if the job of people are not all essential, because the jobs that we do are all to feed us.
No, not all jobs are essential. Some jobs are far more essential than others.
Yeah, well, another aspect of this is that, and hold on, I'm trying to find the objections that people were raising to what you were saying. Oh yes, someone else said, JF will stream in clownface on January 20th when Trump is victorious.
That is true, because there are still people, I don't know what you think about them, Millenniyule, but there are people in my audience, apparently, who believe that Trump will still find a way to get president, to kind of mess up the electoral college count, have maybe Mike Pence intervene with a special resolution and have the House and Senate do stuff, and that somehow he will be president on January 20th. And I said that I was willing to promise anything, that I would be willing to go through any humiliation if that was to happen. And so they've decided that I would be wearing a clown face.
Well, JF in his videos has been pushing the Sidney Powell nonsense, the Texas appeal nonsense. So JF has been feeding this kind of nonsense to his audience since the election, November 3rd.
Just a makeup of clown on my face if that was to happen.
Right, well, you asked me what I thought about this. I don't know enough about US politics and the electoral system to comment on this. I would like Trump to win, but at the moment, I don't think it's going to happen. So I did think it was going to happen until about 3 weeks ago, and then something changed, and I thought, yeah, this is looking less and less likely.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing how naive people are, and I get it, because I would want it to happen as much as they do. But I mean, at some point, you have to realize that given the presidency of Trump, we know a little more about the machine and how it reacts to an enemy entity. And Trump was an enemy entity to the machine. And we've seen today, they don't care. I mean, they voted in the House and they dismissed all of the objections of the president. So the president yesterday night gave up all of his leverage on the COVID relief bill. So he decided to say, all right, let's leave it to the politicians. And the politicians today are saying, all right, we'll give you $2,000 checks for the people, but none of your other objections. So it looks like we will enter 2021 and a Biden presidency with Section 230 unaffected, which means the continuation of internet censorship.
All right, so you're not, buying a clown costume just now?
No, I think I'll wait, because that would be a wasteful expense for now.
Okay, somebody else said, yes, you were right about 2020, but COVID was a black swan.
No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. COVID was one more respiratory viruses as they happen every whatever amount of time you want to put on this. If you want to look at any respiratory virus, they happen every year. If you want to look at any novel strain of respiratory virus that is other than influenza, they happen at least every 5 years. And if you want to...
Okay, so JF is saying this is just another respiratory virus. Well, we have the same number of people. We have about 5,000 people dying a year, dying a day in the United States from COVID-19. That's not just another respiratory virus. This is reckless, irresponsible, and completely detached from reality.
Want to look at a pandemic as deadly as the COVID pandemic, you may have to go back 5 to 10 years, but you're going to find a lot. And so, no,
you're not going to find another respiratory virus in the last 5 to 10 years that is as deadly as COVID.
Wasn't a black swan. It was a regular event that was turned into a black swan by human reaction. And so this is what we've seen in terms of the push for testing. Just remark how early people were on the we have to test. Why did we have to test? Because visibly, the testing didn't keep the pandemic from happening. It's not like it was some sort of very important knowledge that we were obtaining from these tests.
Yeah, it helped in some places where they were able to isolate the infections. Yeah, so East Asian countries, they're testing, tracing, isolating. So Northeast Asian countries are much more intrusive. They have less of a record and less concern for civil rights. So they were able to react to COVID-19 with testing and tracing and intrusion in a way that Western governments would not allow.
The testing ultimately was to justify the intensity of the political reaction and to create a system of positive feedback. So I remember back in the H1N1 days, I made the same observations. I was like, there's something the mainstream media. And in fact, the only person on the internet that was on the virus in the level of detail that I do, but in a different style, was Mr. Mitterker, a few days ahead of me. Morally lost way, or in a way that would be unhinged. I've just said this virus will spread on the planet and there will be a pandemic of the social pressure around vaccines. So I'm alarmed at the invasion of rights that we see more and more. Novel method to introduce vaccines. In fact, there's something, and I'm afraid that we are vaccinating so much and that we are making such vaccines at an even lower standard of evidence. Was say, oh, it's not JF who's hateful. It's the show, the public space is hateful. And they did that by saying it's hateful because it promotes people identifying our beliefs, and they are categorizing us, and they are working to create a record, and say. And so because they changed their rule, and I was in the process of transferring to my BitChute, the video got lost. So able to combat the new versions, or you have like the flu, it comes back every year, and so be it. Since when is that a problem that we have flu?
Yeah, of course. Somebody was asking, JF, what has happened to your mRNA vaccine info video? I can't find it on BitChute or on YouTube.
I had done a very good video about it, but YouTube changed their rules at some point, and they specified a number of things that you couldn't say. And so because they changed their rule, and I was in the process of transferring to my BitChute, the video got lost. So I don't have a copy of it anymore. Maybe I can redo an episode. But unfortunately, there are certain worries and hypotheses that are no more possible to discuss on YouTube.
It's crazy, isn't it? But that does get to another thing that people were talking about in the comments, that you've obviously created you've made a new start this year. If you wouldn't mind, why did you do that? I'm curious.
Well, I rebranded because we are faced with armies of people who are identifying us and identifying our beliefs, and they are categorizing us, and they are working to create a record as if we were hateful people, which we are not. So I'm faced with the fact that I'm so intelligent and I'm so ninja-like in my approach to these agents of hate that I'm outplaying.
There have always been categorizing the beliefs and track records of political opponents. There's nothing new about that. And people on the right, on the distant right, they're just as hateful as people on the left. There's no political orientation that consistently has less hatred. If you love something, you're going to hate that which threatens what you love.
Them, and so they never really quite found a quote of mine that would totally that would demonstrate that I'm the hateful monster that they want me to be. But what they did very often was say, oh, it's not JF who's hateful, it's the show, the public space is hateful. And they did that by saying it's hateful because it promotes people who may be hateful. So you're stuck with these Wikipedia lines that are mind twisting, and you're like, okay, so somehow I would be not hateful, but somehow I made a show which was hateful. Well, I said a show name is so easy to get rid of, and I can add another show name. Now what are you going to say now that my show is called JFG Tonight? Go ahead.
Yeah, and how effective has that been? Is JFG Tonight, is that monetized? Really, how stupid does he think his opponents are that he's just going to rebrand with a new show and then these problems are just going to disappear?
Find a quote of me that is mean.
Well, so I can see what you mean. You're now doing it without guests.
Exactly. That's one sad thing of this new format. I cannot have guests anymore because guests are just not trained enough at this point to respect the YouTube rules for maintaining a monetization. Now, I see that you've been...
So I think this is a mistake. I think JF should switch to a live streaming platform like D Live where he can have guests.
Successful this year with the Millenniyule, but maintaining monetization is another standard on YouTube. And
maintaining monetization, you don't even have monetization on YouTube. And really, is it logical and rational to expect that you are going to get your new channel monetized? I think that is a bad bet.
I have been successful. All of my videos since I started the new show, they're all monetized. So I know how to phrase stuff to stay within the...
Then I'm wrong because I don't recall seeing that.
The Tim Pool space of things while offering an ideological alternative to Tim Pool. But it's a complex list of rules. I mean, if you just go through the COVID rules themselves, there's 15 things you can say about COVID. It's amazing.
So when you try to be a dissident and still operate within YouTube's rules, what's going to happen is at a point where YouTube owes you $3,000, $5,000, $10,000, they're going to re-examine your channel. Then they're going to demonetize it. And then they're not going to pay out all the money that they owe you for the previous 2 months. So I'm not sure how brilliant a strategy this is that JF is pursuing.
Yeah, it seems like a minefield. It feels very... risky being on YouTube nowadays. I mean, I even wondered about doing this episode just on D-Live, as I've done with several episodes this year, because I thought maybe you would enjoy that freedom. But of course, I get the feeling that you wouldn't, because then that would, you might go crazy and say all sorts of very hateful things, which could then be used against you.
No, I mean, the fact is, I prefer being on YouTube because all of my talking, I adjust it. Even if I talk outside of the YouTube context, I respect the YouTube rules because I know that one day they're going to go up to the point of saying, we're demonetizing you because of other activities you've done elsewhere.
They're going to demonetize you no matter what you do, JF. And besides, did you just tell us that you are financially self-sufficient because of your Bitcoin investment? So then why are you so concerned about YouTube monetizing you?
Yeah.
And we did that with Patreon.
Oh, yes, indeed. It's not... That is another trick they can use. I mean, of course, we're operating on their ground, so they can just change the rules. That's a big problem. But would you have anything to say about the matter of alt tech?
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, I'm enthusiastic about alt tech, but its development and its gaining of a network and kind of oligopolistic effect and its drawing of audience is simply smaller. And so we have to deal with this. It's partly because of the technical aspect of video serving and the amount of data that is needed. It's easy to make a little website that serves video. It's another thing to make a website that becomes popular and serves video to everyone. There are technical limits here. There is bandwidth. There is space. So BitChute has been succeeding more or less at doing it, but still not at a very high video resolution and still not at a very high viewership, although this is getting better and better. The viewership is increasing. Perhaps the quality and the availability of live streaming will be needed. Now, there are other options that are actually technically superior in terms of their decentralization, like Library. So they come out very good. They are decentralized. They are apparently very hard to censor.
Hello, and welcome back to
though the problem is, library there's not many people there, and so if you have a small show like me, you can't move there. You may be able to move a part of your audience if you're a big YouTuber, but it's unfeasible for small creators. So YouTube remains the only option for someone like me.
Yeah, see, something that always confuses me about library and these other decentralized ones. How do they keep things off? Like, I know this is kind of
like very evil stuff or criminal stuff.
Child porn and stuff. I mean, how do they? Because if you're going to be anti-censorship and say, well, we just believe in no censorship and we don't want that in the system at all, then how are you going to keep it, civilized?
That's a big problem that any decentralized platform faces. In fact, we've seen BitChute be annoyed by some people on the right because they confirmed this year that they were removing some very, very arch terroristic videos. It's like something that you and I even wouldn't object to it being removed, and they got presented by some extreme parts of the right as, oh my god, they are censoring now. Well, not so much. I mean, I can understand that they need some control to not be involved in criminal pursuit, but yeah, I mean, it's a problem. So ultimately, it boils down to, is the platform truly decentralized, in which case it's unfeasible, or is the platform centralized and it's feasible in some form? You just have to have you're the leader of your website, have some balls, and be able to say, all right, I'm censoring this because this is extreme stuff, but all of the rest stays. And BitChute has taken the not truly decentralized model, which long term could be a worry, but as long as we have someone with balls there, it's not a problem. There are truly decentralized options like the dark web, like there are some networks linked to certain cryptocurrency that are truly decentralized, but these truly decentralized things become dumpster of the internet, and it doesn't
exactly nobody's there. Yeah, it defeats the purpose of making videos to communicate with the public.
Now, Gab is an example of a place where they have adopted a truly decentralized system, and it's been working good. And I'm sad that they have created this alternative Parler to compete with Gab, because in the end, I think Gab was doing a good job. And in fact, they switched from centralized server to decentralized. I don't remember the name of their network, but it's a decentralized system for social media. Parler is centralized, so I expect them to converge toward perhaps some form of censorship in the future. It's very much a conservative right-wing talking points type of thing. It's for the Laura Loomer type.
Yes, exactly. It's interesting to see how much you divide my audience, JF, because
every year, by the way.
Yeah, because on the one hand, I've got somebody saying JF has an 85 IQ, and then at the same time, someone says JFG Tonight is the best channel on YouTube.
Yeah, well, I'm a divisive guy. I think that my whole career on YouTube has been fed by some people as a false promise. I think some people feel betrayed, that somehow I wasn't as extreme as they wanted, or somehow I copped to something that they perceived was...
Yeah, if you have any opinions, you develop any following on YouTube, you're always going to have people who feel betrayed. If you have any human interaction, every human interaction contains the possibility of betrayal, because we feel betrayed when other people don't act as we expect them to, when they don't have the priorities that we expect them to. So this is nothing unique to JF or to the alt-right. All human interactions inherently must contain the possibility of a feeling of betrayal.
A deal breaker for them. I have to say, all my life I've been following my own principles, and I'm always a contrarian and a free thinker. So even in an ideological movement, you won't be attaching me to something or some like common wisdom of other people. I don't bend to pressure, and that's true for my enemies, and it's also true for my friends.
All right. On that note, some other people earlier on were saying that you ban everyone from your channel nowadays, and they were complaining and saying, "Oh, he bans everybody now."
Yeah, well, I do ban. I've been banning since the beginning, so it's not a surprise. It's not now. It's always been the case. I don't like two types of people. I don't like people who come to comment to just put me in trouble. And so if you come and you violate rules that I wouldn't allow myself to violate on the video, I will ban you. It's just a functional thing. You threaten my income. And
yeah, you cannot have any kind of civilization, any kind of community, even online, unless you have walls, unless you have barriers, unless you ban people. And online ventures are going to disproportionately attract antisocial people.
I'm an existentialist. If you threaten my existence to start with, you are off my life, and I block you, I will ban you. The second type that I do ban is just people who come with negative comments that are not into the show. You know, they look at the new show and they complain, and all they can do is complain, and they don't realize that, okay, the things you complain against, I've been sad that they are that way, but it's still the only way I can run a show. So if you're disappointed that I don't have guests, for example.
Okay, let's get something here from Cotto Gottfried from a couple of weeks ago. Joseph Cotto with Matt Ford.
And that's sustained me, and if you're more of a Christian type, I guess.
Above all else, when it comes to the life well lived.
What matters, I guess, having close friends and family, because I mean, it's a cliche, but our relationships are what really make life worth living. It's I've gone through a lot of struggles in my life. I've been poor. I've literally been homeless at one point, but I've always had I've always had my family's always had my back. I've had their backs. I've always had close friends. I help them out. They help me out. And that's sustained me, and if you're more of a Christian type, I guess God is also very important, but we won't go there. But yeah, family in terms of what's here and now, that's the most important thing.
Well, I mentioned peace of mind, but what you just mentioned builds peace of mind. So I guess it really does all boil down to the same thing. One thing that doesn't give me a lot of peace of mind is what's going on now with YouTube, and also people want to sit out the Georgia Senate runoffs. I mean, there's a lot of crazy stuff going on. I will just say before I go on and start on a tangent of mine, if you have a reasonable, responsible question or comment for a matter myself, please do leave it in the live chat. It's a super chat. We will get to it. But please do not say that he'll no longer be on YouTube. He's migrating to Rumble, and Kato Gottfried is following the same path right now. YouTube at this point just is not a serious platform for, I think, a wide-ranging dialogue about events of our day. We'll put it that way. And some people take the dialogue to a much more radical extent than Kato Gottfried does. Quite a few people, in fact. But Kato Gottfried, we moderate our opinions so much. We don't lie, but we moderate our opinions so much. We use safe words so often, and yet to still see this level of censorship. It's sort of like for all of your good efforts, somebody's just throwing a vat of urine in your face. And
you practice good optics, in other words.
Pardon me?
You practice good optics, in other words.
yeah, the optics. I mean, you have great optics, and they're just not paying off for whatever reason. And it's bizarre, this whole thing. There is something in the live chat that I'll address in a second. But Matt, anything to say about anything that I just brought up?
I mean, with the censorship, we really shouldn't be too shocked. I mean, everything has been moving in this direction since at least 2016. But really, if you want to go back to Gamergate in 2014, this is when it all really started getting going. They really want to just kind of enforce a narrative on everyone. As we see how this election has been handled. They declared it for Biden as soon as they could. They try to quash any kind of skepticism about the results. We really are, it sounds dramatic, but we really are kind of living in the Soviet Union in terms of information control. The government isn't, stopping us from speaking about this stuff, but they just outsourced it to private corporations. They've outsourced any kind of real enforcement of, I guess, their social values to corporations. You can see what happened with last night. Pornhub suddenly had their MasterCard suddenly decided to end up payment processing for Pornhub. And I'm not going to defend Pornhub, but it is interesting again that the corporations basically have all the power in this scenario. It wasn't a government regulation that did pump Pornhub in. It was MasterCard. And if you're familiar with, I think it was Dick Masterson was running New Project 2, which is his Patreon alternative. MasterCard got him put on the match list, which is the match list is intended for sleazy merchants who are known for chargebacks and fraud. And he wasn't engaging in any kind of fraud, but because MasterCard didn't like what he was doing, they put him on the match list. So he's basically, he had to end the project because it was screwed. You can't get payment processing for a site like New Project 2. You basically can't exist. I think something similar happened to, Andrew Torba of Gab, where Visa put him on a blacklist. So and not just his business, Gab, but also him as a person and his wife as a person. So if his wife wanted to start a business, she wouldn't be able to get payment processing for it. That's just the world we live in now.
I mean, the whole thing is crazy beyond what words can describe, but it is the reality with which we're confronted. So, I mean, it's something we have to put up with, but it's just something that's really galling all the same. On a brighter note, from Halsey News, a super sticker with a pear that has weights and the words "keep it up." And I think the pear is lifting the weights. That's awesome, Halsey. Thank you very much. I have fond memories of pears because my uncle had. I think the tree is still there, but when I was a boy, I picked pears from the tree on his farm. Believe it or not, pears do grow in Florida, even though apples don't. I have no idea. Actually, somebody did explain to me once, but I've forgotten about it since then. But thank you very much, Halsey. By the way, if you have not yet subscribed to Halsey's channel, what the hell are you waiting for? Do check it out. Subscribe to Halsey. It's worth your while. And thank you very much, Halsey, for the super sticker. Matt, anything to say before we move on?
I mean, I pretty much put it right there. I mean, we're gonna have to spend at least the immediate future looking for workarounds to corporate and online censorship. I'm skeptical of the whole alt tech thing because number one, as we've seen, a lot of these alt tech sites are run by incompetence. My opinion on Gab is pretty well known. BitChute is a popular YouTube alternative. But the problem is, there are a bunch of problems with BitChute, but the number one problem is that's based in the UK, which is, I mean, if you're looking to guarantee free speech, the UK is probably the last place on planet Earth you would want to headquarter a site like that. BitChute has already had to take down certain types of content because it may not follow with British law. Maybe one of these sites will emerge and become the platform that we're all looking for. I have some hope, but at the moment, Alt-Tech really doesn't have a good record. I mean, the closest I can think of a site in this vein that has really been successful and useful is DLive, and DLive is not really affiliated with the whole Alt-Tech thing. They basically just want to be a Twitch alternative that uses cryptocurrency. I have my problems with DLive, but it's a decent platform, I'd say.
It is. Oh, I was asking if anything about what Halsey brought up, but I think clearly you don't. But to talk about what you just said, the Alt-Tech has been a real disaster thus far, and Rumble and Parler might be considered the exceptions to the rule, but neither were, even though they are alt-tech, I don't think they're really devised to be alt-tech. They just sort of have come to fill that role. They had much more establishment backing. So I think that both of them might be beacons of light, even though bizarre as it sounds. Twitter is not that big of a problem for me censorship-wise. They've never got after me for anything that I've written. And they're very bad, obviously, when it comes to deleting people, as you saw with Molyneux and many others. But they're not at the level that YouTube is at now. So that's, I guess, worth mentioning here, just to give a sense of perspective. But I think Parler, even though it has its issues, has a lot of issues, actually. But that and Rumble, which seems quite promising, that is big now with Dan Bongino. And there are others as well who are going to go there. It's getting more and more popularity, probably by the hour, let alone by the day. And they're going to have live streaming capabilities there up soon. So once that's there, there's no point even doing YouTube anymore in any regard. But yeah, Alt-Tech by and large has been a huge disappointment. And that is obviously a shame for a host of reasons.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's worth keeping a toe on YouTube, a presence on YouTube as long as you're able to, just because it's the largest platform. Same as it's useful to keep a platform, keep a toe on Twitter, as it were. And you should try and stay on these platforms as long as you can, just because you can reach the widest audience that way. Mm-hmm. But you should also have the backups in place. I mean, to give an example, if you're familiar with Andy Nowicki, the dissident right novelist, Terrahouse, my publishing company, has republished 3 of his books. He was banned from YouTube a couple of days ago because YouTube accused him of cyberbullying Hillary Clinton.
How the hell did they accuse him of doing that on YouTube, or did they say he did that off YouTube?
On YouTube. So it's like, one of the most powerful women in the world was just really threatened by this one guy in Georgia just making videos criticizing her.
Unbelievable. That really takes the cake. It's I don't even know if there are any words for that, how ridiculous that situation is. I will just say that I will be glad when Kato Godfrey is able to start leaving YouTube. I intend to start uploading episodes that are streamed here on YouTube to, I almost said BitChute, I meant to say Rumble, in January, early January. So it's going to be interesting to see how this goes. I hope I have really good vibes, shall we say, from Rumble. So I'm hopeful about it. But there's always an issue that could come up with regard to this stuff. Matt, anything to say about what I just brought up?
Well, I did want to highlight something Halsey said in the chat with regards to the comment he says here. The real issue of alt tech is that as soon as they get big enough to compete, they have to accept investment and then they censor, which is actually fairly accurate. I remember Gab started acting this way after they began taking investments in 2017. And Gab right now is kind of the only reason to be on Gab is if you want to interact with legitimate neo-Nazis or MAGA boomers, which is I don't get the use of my time on top of the other things that Gab has done. That may be the case with some of these other platforms. I don't know, but I think that's a good point that Halsey brought up.
The whole thing with Gab, I never got into it. I always thought it would be a waste of time, even though the concept was very, very good. There was nothing low tier about it. But the problem with Gab is that it never cultivated a broad enough user base that it to prevent itself from being pigeonholed is sort of like what you mentioned, a neo-Nazi or baby boomer type deal. But I think that Parler has done it because it had more interest from establishment conservatives or relatively established conservatives from the get-go. And an alternative social media site needs such users if it wants to. It needs some big people who have mainstream credibility to come along at the beginning, or else it could run the risk of just being thought as a haven for outcasts and loons and all that stuff.
Yeah, I'd say the ultimate solution here for people who are truly concerned is not to rely on. Obviously, you can't rely on the mainstream sites, and I wouldn't rely on the alt tech sites either. I would go the old-fashioned route of buying a domain name and setting up your own website. You can purchase a domain name from offshore registrars that are based in the Caribbean that don't censor. You can purchase offshore hosting as well, things that I have done in the past. Since I've about a year ago, actually, my websites were actually censored off of a hosting provider because I was accused of violating their terms of service. I got a new hosting provider, and I haven't had that problem since. Really, the only way to have total autonomy or close to it is to be on a platform that you own and control. We may have to go back to the old-fashioned 2000s era way of blogs and mailing lists, which or even physical mailing lists if you want to go to that extreme. Because if you own it, you have total control over it. If you pick the right registrar and the right hosting provider, there are still many of them out there that are committed to free speech. You have more of an advantage than if you rely on Twitter or even if you rely on something like Parler.
Yeah, Parler is not the be-all, end-all. Its problem is not with censoring people because of their political views. Its problem is that it follows the FCC content regulation guidelines, so it has a very narrow definition of obscenity, that kind of thing. And it's kind of like Mother Hubbard looking over your tweets. I don't care for that at all. But I mean, it is better than some leftist authoritarian looking over your tweets or your comments, whatever they be called in Parler. So I mean, there are other issues too, but that's what comes to my mind immediately. And at Rumble, I haven't heard of any real problems yet, even though I'm looking into it. I think I did mention at the beginning of the discussion here that JF Gariepy is moving to not Parler, moving to Rumble eventually. He announced it on a show last night. And I think it's good that he's doing that. I think a lot of other people are doing that too. Obviously, it's something that's going to take some time. It's not just going to happen tomorrow. But it's good to see that people are not necessarily going to put up with this YouTube nonsense for all too much longer.
Yeah, I mean, it's all these stuff, but again, I think the ultimate solution for a lot of people, if you're really concerned, is again get your own URL and get your own website, and get your own mailing list. I've advocated this for years. The most effective form of social networking, if you want to put it like this, is a mailing list of some kind, a newsletter, because not everyone's on Twitter, not everyone's on Facebook, not everyone's on YouTube, but everyone on the internet has an email address. And if you're looking at it from the perspective like you want to sell products, you want to sell like a book or something, the easiest, most effective way to do this is a mailing list. I've been banned from Twitter, I've been banned from Facebook, I've had my YouTube heavily censored. I was even briefly banned from YouTube at one point before I got that reversed, but all throughout that time, I've been able to hold on to my website, and I've been able to hold on to my mailing list. And I still promote those as the easiest ways to kind of follow my work if you're so inclined.
And yeah, Substack I think is a really interesting development. It's just having a mailing list. I'm going to be starting. It's not part of Kato Godfrey. It's my own thing, my own news and culture newsletter there next week. So, but no, that is a mailing list, and you're right. It's very effective. It gives you a lot of latitude that you wouldn't otherwise have for the reasons which we brought up. Halsey English has joined us. Halsey, how's it going?
Very good. How's it going, Matt? How's it going, Kato? There's a couple points that you guys were bringing up that requires a more in-depth dive. In that the layers of censorship that they have are just getting off the charts in the way that they do it. It's not just that they can ban your payment processor. It's not just that they can ban your YouTube channel. If you create an alternative that starts to get bigger and you start to take investment, then you have to start listening to investors. But eventually what they'll do is they'll ban you from the App Store and the Google Play Store. And if you don't have access to mobile, now Gab created an icon so you could still use Gab, or DLive is still on the App Store because I don't think they consider them a true threat yet. But once they ban you from mobile, your people can't even really get alerts that you're going live or that you're going to be doing a stream. So it gets to the point where the bigger you get, the more dangerous it is. And Forney's right about having your own site and your own mailing list, but we've seen MailChimp start to ban people left and right. And the mailing services are how you get tokens with the email provider so your emails don't go into spam. You know, and if they start sending your emails into spam for all your email lists, people A, don't realize they're getting the emails, they just figured you stopped sending them, and B, they eventually they'll just throw you off because they'll say you're sending out too much spam and too much, you know, marketing content that nobody wants. You know, so the layers of censorship are so much deeper than just, you know, throwing you off one channel or throwing you off one platform. When they decide that you've become a legitimate threat, they will stop you from functioning in general.
Very scary stuff, Halsey, but worth hearing all the same. Thank you for bringing it up. Talk about taking a deeper dive into this hellscape. Matt, anything to say about what Halsey brought up?
Yeah, that is a major concern. The reason I brought up mailing lists, however, is because the censorship there has been considerably slower than, you know, Twitter and whatnot. I'm not saying it's ideal, but right now it's generally better than most of these mainstream sites. It's not a perfect solution, but it is an option.
It's the only option right now because it's the hardest to trace. That's the only reason why it's still the best option if you have your own mailing list, your own website, and you're sending out your content or anything to them. Because even if they consider you a threat, even if they want to come after you, it's still the hardest to trace how big your audience is or how much influence you actually have. There's a lot of different, and I'm implementing one. We're relaunching Halsey News in the next 2 weeks, and I'm implementing. There's a lot of video players for streaming that let you white label that don't censor at all. It's part of their terms of service that you can use their white label player for whatever you want, as long as you're willing to pay the fee. You know, so that's going to wind up being an alternative. But again, it requires getting back to basics and doing internet marketing in a way that isn't as easy as having a YouTube channel or a Rumble channel or a DLive channel. Like you have to actually get out there and start getting noticed and getting people to migrate to your own platform.
Very hard to do. I mean, really, really hard to do. And most people just aren't going to take the time to do that. And even if they have the time and they're willing to expend the effort, it's going to be, they might just not have the intelligence to pull it off, quite frankly. But, you know, I think that when it comes to stuff like DLive and BitChute and Rumble, there is a lot of promise there. I mean, you know, if you look at someone like, say, Ethan Ralph was kicked off of this platform, he does make a very good go of things on DLive and with Streamlabs, as opposed to YouTube Super Chats. And, you know, with Rumble, I don't think will be any more restricted than DLive, judging from everything that I've seen. So, I mean, not quite at the point where people are being, you know, are forced to do necessarily what Halsey was saying, even though some can certainly choose to do that. But I think that, you know, that there are still some viable options left, but just breaking out of this mindset that YouTube is the place to go for all this video sharing content. You have to sort of train yourself to look at these alternate platforms. And before Halsey or Matt speak, I'm sure they have quite a few things to say about what I just brought up. I do think that, you know, here's someone like Nick Fuentes is able to go on DLive and use, I believe, Entropy to still earn a decent living, I think a much reduced one from what he got on YouTube, but a decent one all the same. I think it does mean that not all hope is lost for using platforms, video sharing platforms, that you don't have to do it yourself as a means of having, you know, a show that has at least a reasonable enough following. Now, Halsey, Matt, whoever wants to take this away, please do so.
Halsey speak.
I mean, the real issue with a platform like DLive, right? If you look at the donations that Fuentes and Ethan Ralph were getting before they went to DLive, they were probably somewhere in the realm of double to triple, you know, what they're getting now. Maybe even more. Yeah, we don't know for sure, but maybe even more. You know, so DLive, again, it's a good alternative. It is a good alternative now because most people don't know about it. Like they've already started publishing, you know, your traditional SPLC reports about how it's a center for Nazism, and they're starting to go after DLive. Just the owner doesn't care, but he'll start to care when they throw him off the Apple Store, the Apple App Store, and the Google Playlist. You know, and he'll start to care when it comes to a point where he can't attract the investment he needs in order to grow the platform. I mean, just the bandwidth alone costs a fortune when you're letting people live stream to the point you are with DLive. And also remember, DLive won't host your content. So even if you get a viable thing going with DLive, you have to start posting your videos elsewhere.
Yeah, I think they keep it up for 19 days or something like that. And I will just say one thing. Actually, Matt has some really interesting thoughts on DLive, so I'm sure he'd like to share them as soon as I'm done with this. But one very interesting thing brought up by Gariepy is that DLive is very childish. It's very like, you know, ninjas and lemons and this and that. And if you want to do a show that's not catered toward the Zoomer audience, which is, you know, let's be real, I don't think Zoomers are any of our core constituencies. There is a sort of unfortunate element to it that can sort of cheapen the whole thing. But I mean, hell, if you have to use DLive, you have to use DLive. Let's not, you know, get too snobbish here. Anyway, Matt, anything to say about DLive? Because you and I have spoken in the past about it. You have some really, really interesting thoughts on the platform.
Well, with DLive, the thing I like about DLive is that they do have fairly restrictive requirements on what you can and can't say on the platform, but they're very transparent about it and very, they're very straightforward. You know, you can't say the N-word. You know, you can't if you do political content, you have to put an X tag on it. And I don't necessarily like some of these restrictions, but they're very clear about it. Whereas YouTube, with something like YouTube and all these other platforms, what you can say is constantly changing, and you can get in trouble for something that you posted, you know, years ago. You know, that's suddenly against the rules now. Like I gave the example of Wiki being banned from YouTube. The videos that got him banned from YouTube were 4 years old. You know, they didn't have a problem with it up until now. The issue with DLive, you know, in the end, I mean, you brought up an interesting point with kind of the whole structure of ninja meetings and whatnot. You know, that's because it was DLive. I don't think was ever intended to be a political platform. The guys who created it wanted to create a basically an alternative to and I think they're going to try and keep on that. You know, over the summer, there was actually an effort to kind of, you know, I'm not even confirming this. They were sort of trying to not ban people like Nick Fuentes from the platform, but try and make things so annoying for them that they would just leave of their own accord. And there were a bunch of DLive streamers who were like, you know, just either left-leaning or apolitical, like gamer streamers who were just trying to, you know, catalog all this and get them off the platform. They didn't succeed, but that might be a problem, you know, in a year or so. Like Halsey said, you know, if DLive gets any bigger, you know, it's almost certain that they're going to throw people like Fuentes under the bus just to maintain their viability as a gaming platform.
I agree, and I'm sure I'll have something to say there, but I'll just interject briefly. I think that DLive does not mind politics, even though, as Matt said, it was not intended to be political. I think that they certainly would throw Fuentes under the bus if they get more attention over the next year or so. I don't think they would necessarily mind any of our shows being on there, but I think that there probably is a sort of line that they cross. When we start getting spotlights from the SPLC or the ADL or something like that, then certainly when you're in that territory, which Fuentes obviously is, then you're going to, I think, utilize crosshairs. But that's a pretty high bar to meet. If you don't meet that bar, very few people meet that bar, thankfully. So I don't think that most folks would have the issues with DLive even as it gets more visibility. Anyway, Halsey, anything to say about anything Matt said or I said?
I'll take it a step further with the censorship level on DLive. They also force you to moderate your chat. But they do it at a level that's unbelievable. With TFM's channel, someone went into the chat and he has every possible variation of the N-word or anything blocked from the chat. And someone went in and put a sticker in for the letter N and then spelled out like the rest of the word in like an odd way, and then went and reported himself, like just obviously logged out and logged back in and reported himself. And they shut him down for a day. They were very responsive, which is something that the other platforms aren't. And they realized that they had made a mistake, but they shut him down for like 2 days before they got back to him because he didn't moderate his chat well enough. And so he basically just turned the chat off for anybody unless you were an actual subscriber. So that like you'd have to make a financial commitment in order with your multiple accounts in order to do that. And it's been okay since. I mean, for him, it was the opposite. When the Morning Constitutional, the show we do on Wednesdays, we used to get on his YouTube channel about 700-800 live viewers. And when we switched to DLive because he got thrown off of YouTube, we went up to about 1,500 to 1,600. So it's been very good for him. But they also denied him access to the partner program. Like they won't give him like that extra whatever status it is because they said they disagree with his content. And I mean, he doesn't post racist content. He obviously could be considered misogynist, by them. But I mean, it's just they're very under the radar right now, and they will definitely throw Fuentes under the bus because Fuentes is easy to throw under the bus. Like he doesn't have any kind of muscle anywhere. So and he's not bringing in enough like viewers and money to them that they can go, oh well, he's our brand.
Okay, let me cut to the real reason that you watch this show. You love to hear me read from learned tomes. This one is called Resisting History, Historicism and its Discontents in German Jewish Thought. So let me give you the good stuff. So the old problems of historical relativism and fragmentation have not disappeared. They are with us today. I'm reminded of this paradox by a controversy that recently broke out in the Jewish community of Los Angeles. So this book was published in 2003. During the Passover holiday of April 2001, Rabbi David Wolpe of Sinai Temple in Los Angeles ignited a firestorm by delivering a sermon that called into question the historical authenticity of the biblical account of the Exodus story. The rabbi pointed out that there was no persuasive historical or archaeological evidence to validate the tale of Israelites escaping the clutches of Pharaoh's army across the Red Sea. By extension, it's not clear that the Israelites had ever been in Egypt as slaves. So I remember I was going to an Orthodox synagogue at this time, and the rabbi's response to this, because it made the front pages of the Los Angeles Times, the rabbi's response to this was to pull out the Siddur, the Jewish prayer book, and to read to us the 13 essential principles, Yigdal, the 13 essential principles of the Jewish faith, including that the Torah is eternal and it comes from God. And that, to him, was the proof that that the Exodus story took place historically as it is described in the Bible. David Wolpe's sermon, so David Wolpe is a conservative rabbi, stunned his audience. His audience is about half or more Persian, who tend to be traditional, some of whom deemed his words sacrilege and others of whom regarded them as intellectually courageous. Soon enough, news of the address spilled out beyond the synagogue's walls, due in no small measure to front-page exposure in the Los Angeles Times under the headline, Doubting the Story of Exodus. At both local and national levels, the sermon provoked fiercely divergent reactions. One supporter, writing in a local Jewish newspaper, insisted that defending a rabbi in the 21st century for saying the Exodus story isn't factual is like defending him for saying that the earth isn't flat. Modern notions of Judaism had moved far away from literal understanding of the Torah. Meanwhile, a detractor in the same paper declared that if the Exodus did not occur, there is no Judaism. That was Dennis Prager's point. According to Prager, logic and common sense dictate that the Exodus story is more than a fairy tale. Otherwise, why would Jews have continued to repeat it in ritual fashion for 3,000 years? Many observers from the scholarly world, the wide rift opened by this Passover sermon, if not its content, came as a considerable surprise. For years, historical and archaeological research has challenged the veracity of the Exodus story. One journalist surveying the state of the field in 1993 concluded that there isn't a shred of hard evidence, not a single pot unearthed or one Hebrew letter scratched into a stone to prove that the Israelites were ever slaves in Egypt or that they ever wandered in the desert. Not all scholars would accept This sweeping assertion or the claim that the absence of hard and fast evidence testing to their presence means that there were no Israelites in Egypt. But ongoing research by archaeologists, including a number of prominent Israelis, has added more fuel to the fire. Their work calls into question not only the presence of Israelites in Egypt, but also the claim that the post-Exodus Israelites went on to conquer Canaan. In drawing upon this search, David Wolpe was not seeking to unhinge the faith commitments of Jews. Rather, he hoped to confront head-on the brittleness of literal readings of the Bible, and in doing so, to maintain the Jewish tradition of sustaining faith by seeking truth. Please don't everyone just pour into the chat discussing the historicity of the Exodus. You're just overwhelming the chat right now with all your different comments on archaeology, on biblical criticism, on source criticism versus historical criticism, lower criticism, higher criticism. Please just calm down. Don't just flood the chat with your controversial comments about the historicity of the Exodus. Whether Rabbi Wolpe succeeded in this task is a matter of opinion. Differences on the question of how to read the Bible have left deep denominational tracks in European, now American Judaism. Rabbi Wolpe's own conservative affiliation anchored in a healthy respect for modern scholarship, so scholarship here simply refers to pursuing the truth wherever it leads, led him to a stance that was fundamentally unacceptable to the vast majority of Orthodox Jews. At the same time, his words revealed that the gap between academy and community was quite substantial. What many scholars had taken for granted for years was nothing short of scandalous to many in his lay audience. So my father, for 40 years, ran a non-denominational evangelical Christian foundation, Good News Unlimited, and he would circumscribe the things that he would say publicly so that they would fit in with popular preconceptions. So he wouldn't share things like the historicity of the Exodus is very much in question by scholars. Most germane for our purpose is the yawning chasm that this episode revealed between history and faith. And please feel free to add to the chat your favorite book by UCLA professor David N. Myers, and feel free to share how it has touched your life. Kierkegaard made clear in the mid-19th century that this chasm is a central feature of intellectual life in the West. David Wolpe controversy demonstrated that the conflict between history and faith is not a Christian problem alone, but an ongoing one in the lives of 21st century Jews. So generally speaking, since the Enlightenment, Christianity has done the best of all the three major religions in dealing with the Enlightenment's challenges, and Judaism has had the most difficulty. Rabbi Wolpe declared to his audience that spiritual truths, the exalted ideals of freedom and justice contained in the Exodus story, were independent of historical facts. So the spiritual truths of this show, they're independent of how many people watch. They're independent of how many people say, oh, good job, 40. Great point, 40. Love what you're doing, 40. Can't wait to subscribe, 40. Big fan, 40. All right, the spiritual truths of this show are completely independent of those things. Ironically, Rabbi Wolpe chose to make the point in decidedly historicist fashion by summoning up modern scholarly evidence to challenge the historicity of Exodus itself. Thus, we come up again against a curious paradox. Ambivalence over the use of history coincides with an unavoidably historicist way of thinking. So historicist means that we understand everything in its historical context, that you can't understand any event or any literature or any idea unless you understand the context from which it originated, for a piece of literature, who wrote it, when was it written, for whom was it written, for example. And so feel free to share in the chat names of your favorite historicist thinkers and share examples of how they have touched your lives. We yearn to discover a source of meaning for past events that transcends the single historical fact. We are confined by the limitations of our historicist mode of thinking, just as the Kabbalists were constrained in their efforts to decipher the divine word by their unavoidable reliance on human language. So what we have going on in this show, we transcend the limitations of human language. because I am communicating from the heart, and you are receiving my message in your heart, and then you are bouncing back from your heart to share some very brief sentiments in the chat. But these sentiments, they're just metaphors for very powerful truths that you can only hint at through allegory and simile, metaphor and parable, just so that the intensity and the purity of the truths that you convey through this chat don't just blow the minds of the great unwashed and the uncircumcised. The roots of this dilemma surfaced well before the golden age of historicism in the 19th century. Do you guys remember the golden age of historicism in the 19th century? Like, feel free to throw down in the chat your favorite movies about the golden age of historicism in the 19th century. I mean, what a wellspring of artistic and theatrical and literary creativity. I mean, the golden age of historicist thinking. Wow. I mean, those were times when people just pursued truth, justice, and love in a disinterested and scholarly way, without bias, without fear or favor. Do you remember the golden age of historicist thinking in the 19th century? What a wonderful time. They reach back at least to the 17th century, when the tools of critical historical scholarship were first applied by figures such as Spinoza and Richard Simon to Holy Scripture, the bedrock of religious faith and authority. The underlying methodological imperative. So please share with me in the chat right now your number one underlying methodological imperative. Even then, was to contextualize. Are you ready to contextualize our show today with your dominant underlying methodological imperative? I went on a date the other night, and after we had a few drinks, I was ready to contextualize. And when she seemed ready, I showed her my underlying methodological imperative, and she gasped. She said, 40, I love your underlying methodological imperative. When I absorb it intellectually, I've never felt so good. Your underlying methodological imperative is just perfect. It's just the right size. It feels so good. It blows my mind. I love 40. I love, give me more of your underlying methodological imperative. Go, 40, go. Over the course of more than 3 centuries, the tools of critical history have become ubiquitous. Yeah, that's what she said. She said, 40, your underlying methodological imperative, it's just ubiquitous this evening. It's ubiquitous. I cannot refuse your underlying methodological imperative in any way, shape, or form. This worldview proclaims that human history belongs to a long, undulating, but ultimately chartable current. And that's exactly what we did. I showed her my underlying methodological imperative, and then we engaged in a long undulating, but ultimately completely chartable current. I mean, I gave her my underlying methodological imperative, and she took my underlying methodological imperative and she arched her back to contextualize my underlying methodological imperative. And then we just went at it with long, undulating, but ultimately chartable current. It was so sweet. It was the best. And then we moved on to a vast divine terrain whose grand design eludes full human comprehension. I mean, that's how high I took my underlying methodological imperative, which she absorbed and contextualized. Then off we went on a long, undulating, but ultimately chartable current. And where we ended up was a vast divine terrain whose grand design eludes full human comprehension. So if I was to chart everything that went on this evening, if I was to note carefully its width, its length, its depth, its frequent bends and curves, well, that's what the main historicist occupation is all about, mate. So this is what she said to me. As a mode of cognition, your underlying methodological imperative just makes me want to contextualize you all night long. I'm ready for a long, undulating, but ultimately chartable current because you take me out to a vast divine terrain whose grand design eludes full human comprehension. And she said to me, 40, as a mode of cognition, historicism has been a remarkable success story. Your underlying methodological imperative, your historicism, 40, it's come to dominate our way of thinking about the past. It conditions us to place the single event in context and then link it to a chain of other contextually bound events. Its ubiquity has also bestowed a dignified status onto a field of inquiry once deemed a second-tier discipline, indeed once scorned as a waste of time by the greatest of medieval Jewish thinkers, Maimonides, the Rambam. I shouldn't have told you so much. I couldn't help
Bread
it.
and butter. He's not like PewDiePie was to YouTube.
Exactly. And, of course, let's be honest. At the end of the day, no matter how how un-PC and how maybe in what now passes for polite society, TFM's content would be thought of as objectionable, there's no way anyone would look at that and look at what Fuentes does and see an equivalency there. I mean, obviously what Fuentes does is like a lightning rod of extreme controversy, to say the absolute least. I still wonder, and this might be an interesting thing. I was totally off topic, didn't intend to bring it up, but when Halsey enters the chat, some really good stuff comes into my mind, and here it is. I do wonder what will happen to Fuentes in the long run. That to me is still an unresolved question, because when he will get thrown off of D-line eventually, I think that's a given. But where will he go after that? I don't think Rumble will be much more hospitable toward him. If he could do what Halsey suggested and set up his own thing, I don't know that he would have the ability to do that. Or is he just going to become? What would you say? He'd become Halsey, perhaps the most based manager at Lowe's or something like that?
I said he'd become the most edgy Home Depot manager anyone's ever met.
yeah. I don't know if you guys have any thought on the Fuentes or the Gariepy before we move along, please.